Oh my God. Thank you for letting me know. I didn't even put on my microphone gain. MP, I appreciate you a lot. Um, I'll get this show on the road real quick. My only caveat for today is I might be bothered by my cat. She is she went through some stuff last week. She got spayed, so it's been tough on her, but she's mostly healed now. So if she interrupts during the show, I might have to get her situated. So that might be a little bit of a of a problem. But other than that, we'll be reacting to the new politics of sex with Stephen Baskerville. This is on the Aaron Renn Show. So he's a smaller channel, kind of like me. And I want to watch this because I found this guy on Twitter, and he's pretty good. He's like, I don't know, he's interesting. You know, he's definitely a tradcon conservative, but he's a PhD in political science and has a few books, and it seems like he is pretty critical of conservatives in general when it comes to family law. And it also seems like he's pretty up to date with some of the laws and stuff, so I can't help but listen to his interview. All right. I'll get started here in a couple minutes. The only other thing I got to say is I've spent like the last probably 4 hours recording and editing a video, and I'm debating when to upload that. I might upload it tomorrow, but if the stream doesn't go too long tonight, I'll work on the thumbnail tonight and possibly even upload it tonight. But then we might get this awkward sort of upload of 11:45 p.m. and I don't know if that's good or bad for the algorithm or not. But just to give you guys a little hint of what it's about the Whatever podcast and my conspiracy theory about him. All right, let's see what we can do. She keeps bothering me. If I got to put her back outside, then so be it. Nope. Oh, she's biting this now. Okay. All right, well, I tried. If anybody else is in there, just say hello or just say ready, and then I'll get this started. I'll probably give it another couple minutes. I know Klaus couldn't make it. Shout out to Klaus in Germany. He couldn't make it today because he has, he's got work in the morning. Oh, yeah, that's another thing I forgot to mention. This show is supposed to be Saturday night at 7 p.m. And I messed up, you know what I'm saying? I had some stuff to do last night, so I couldn't do it yesterday, which was kind of annoying. But I didn't want to let the weekend go by and not stream at all. So I made sure to do it tonight. Ow, ow, ow. Cat's biting me. Ooh. That can't continue for another 2 hours. Nope, she doesn't care about that. Let's see. Yeah, so, yo, Dan the Man. Shout out to you, bro. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate seeing you here. I might as well just get this show on the road. Sound effects are going good. And just to reiterate, if anyone's come in recently, the only thing that can derail this or cause a problem is essentially my cat. She got spayed on Monday, which I feel really bad about. Like, I just feel like horrible about it, but my family was like, it would be the best thing, you know? So that's what we ended up doing. And, she's been kind of like depressed lately, or she, I guess, hey, any major surgery. She wasn't herself, but now she's like 90% back. So I'm grateful for that. All right. So here's hoping she doesn't bite me anymore and I don't have to put her outside. All right. So the new politics of sex. We're live on
practically the default today.
I watched about 50 minutes of this while I was at work. And it talked about a lot of interesting concepts, like it discussed child support to some extent. There are some things, I think I agree with a lot of it. There are some things that I think might be a little interesting or questionable. I've got some other sources that I'm going to go over through as we discuss this more. And, we'll see what he has to say. But largely, I think he's pretty good. I follow him on Twitter, and I first kind of found him when I was during the Tradcon Red Pill split. I liked his commentary on some of that stuff. And I think I probably found him through Pearl or something like that. So anyways, let me just get this show on the road. If anybody comes in, then hopefully we'll see him in here and we'll do a shout out. If volume or anything's a problem, guys, just let me know.
Hi, this is Aaron, and welcome back to the show. It's a very exciting show today because all the way from Romania, I have Stephen Baskerville joining us today. Stephen is a longtime academic. He was a professor at Patrick Henry College at Howard University.
Okay, she's being bad. I'm going to have to put her outside. Sorry, guys. By the way, this is the Aaron Renn Show, so it would probably be good if you guys gave him a subscribe because it's a relatively small channel. All right, that's the last time that'll happen today. Okay. But yeah, be sure to subscribe to his channel. The Aaron Renn Show. He's got 3,000 subscribers. This interview right now only has 2,000 views, but I think it deserves more. So, without further ado, gentlemen.
And he's now living in Romania, so we want to talk about that a little bit. And we're here today to talk about his book, his most recent book, The New Politics. That's upside down. The New Politics of Sex, which is very interesting. And then potentially also some work that he has in the most recent couple issues of Chronicles magazine. If you're not familiar with Chronicles, it's the main PaleoCon magazine. It's been around for a long time. I don't know if they still use the term PaleoCon, but Stephen, thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
This book of yours, I mean, it is fire. There's no other way to describe it. I've been a manosphere reader for a while, kind of part of the research that I do on men's issues. And so I'm very familiar with like men's rights activists and, about the deepest expert on them, but I've read a lot of their stuff in this. But the way that you talk about divorce and family court is more direct even than they do, I think, a lot of times. And so I just want to start off by reading a quote. I think it's from one of your recent articles that talks about this, and then just ask you. I never thought about it this way, and but it was really thought provoking. So here's what you say about divorce. You say, "quote."
Yo, shout out D. Trevor. Hi, Shah. Peter Schiff is live at the same time. Damn decisions. I'm sorry, man. Yeah, I messed up, man. I was supposed to stream. My usual time is Saturday at 7 p.m., but I had some last-minute plans yesterday, and I just couldn't say no. I did regret having to move the stream, though. If I remember, is Peter Schiff the investor guy? Sounds like the investor guy. But I appreciate you being in here and maybe lurking a bit, even if you got to flip back and forth between those two.
For the first time under common law, courts could summon legally innocent people, assume control over their private life, punish them for perfectly legal things they do in the course of private life. Courts acquired the power to dissolve their marriage without consent or grounds, evict them from their homes, seize control of their children, restrict their movements, raid their bank accounts, confiscate their houses, extract payments for services they never requested, garnish their wages, deny them passports and driving permits.
A lot of the stuff that he's mentioning is straight out of like the child support agency, like denying passports and taking money straight out of their bank account. That's 100% a child support activity.
Seize their professional licenses and incarcerate them without trial or without record, unquote. Does that really happen?
Oh, absolutely.
It definitely happens.
I document all of that in my book. And anyone who's been through the family courts will know that this not only is possible, but it in fact does happen. Yeah, it's astounding.
Yeah,
nobody's ever really explored this. No academic has ever taken this on.
I'm sorry. Trevor says, could you lower the volume on the video slightly? Absolutely. Again, I very much value anybody who tells me about sound issues, because that annoys me to no end. Let me know if this is okay.
In a systematic way.
I'm going to
Nobody's ever really explored this. No academic has ever taken this on in a systematic way. For better or worse, I'm the first one who's ever done that, and no one has ever undertaken it from a political standpoint. I mean, I'm trained in political science, and I was particularly keen to look at the politics behind what is going on in the court systems and connected industries. And it was quite astounding, because I realized that nobody had ever really, no real academic had ever really looked at this.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about it this way, but in essence, right, you're right about the fact that a father or a husband and a father, if your wife divorces you, she can go file for divorce. You don't have to have done, and not only anything legally wrong, nothing morally wrong. She doesn't have to raise a single, statement about anything that you've done wrong, but can basically break up the marriage. And then all of a sudden, especially if there are kids, the court has completely, is treating you worse than somebody on parole or probation.
And what he's basically talking about there is the transition from at-fault divorce to no fault. And one of the things that we know about at-fault is that there was no unilateral divorce, meaning that one person couldn't just get a divorce for no reason. And another thing about at-fault is if both parties wanted to divorce but neither party did anything bad, the courts would not grant that. So that gets into a discussion of collusion, which we might discuss a little bit more later.
Absolutely. In many cases, that everything you do is now subject to court monitoring, and they sort of completely take over your life, even though you're actually not guilty of any crime. You've never even been accused of any crime. You haven't done anything wrong. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate that.
No, it's astounding what's going on in these courts. There's no rule of law whatsoever.
It's complete
legal nihilism.
I've never, I just never thought about it that way. And, so all the various, I've never personally seen or personally had experiences with some of these terrible cases that you often hear about, like in the men's rights activist world. But it is kind of crazy, because I have to think about it. Like, I'm actually divorced. So I was divorced. We didn't have any kids. So I have been through the process. I mean, I must say my process was quite easy, from a legal perspective. But I think it's one of these things where the average person, until you've actually been through this process, you really have no idea what it's like. I mean, there are certain things.
Man, that's so true. And anyone who's been through it, I can only speak of it. I haven't been divorced, but I can only speak of it, or married, because I worked at a child support agency. So I saw so many cases, I spoke with so many people, and I read so many divorce orders and helped to enforce those orders and, establish child support orders and genetic tests and all that stuff. So I saw a lot of the times where, a guy got the real short end of the stick. And that's why, I'm able to know, but I can agree with him, because most people don't even understand this until it's like you standing at, in front of the court, or talking to me on the other side of the desk.
It's like everybody goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get their license. And so if someone talks about some terrible thing that happens at the Department of Motor Vehicles, anybody can immediately relate to it. But when you start talking about like divorce court with kids, unless you had actually been through it, you literally have no clue what's going on.
That's right. It's governed by a series of cliches. We hear about ugly divorce and nasty custody battle and so forth, and these cliches are repeated even by professional, political pundits, commentators, and so forth. Even conservative ones, they rehash these cliches. But the cliches, behind the cliches, there's something extremely serious going on. I mean, it's the wholesale removal, elimination of people's constitutional rights and constitutional government itself. Yeah, there's nowhere in our society today where constitutional government has been more completely eliminated than in the family, and as a result of the divorce courts.
Yeah. So how do these courts? I think everybody like me, I think about a court as like a criminal case. The cops have to stop you. They have to read you your rights. You have the right to an attorney. The court's open to the public. There's like a transcript and records and all of that. These courts are different than that. How do these courts operate?
Well, that's right. They're not really courts. In fact, they're effectively administrative agencies.
That's one thing that's certainly true of child support. And I think even, certain child support legislation, federally speaking, has made it so child support orders can be granted through an administrative system that really is not like a true judicial court system. So like in California, the person sitting at the front of the courtroom that actually, brings the gavel down or whatever and makes the order, he was technically a commissioner. Then you have actually family law court judges, and they handle divorces and stuff like that. They kind of have an overarching thing. But the reason there's administrative courts, I guess you could say, or just administrative agencies that do this is because the amount of cases is so much that it allows a quick way of processing them through without bogging down the courts too much. And that really was a problem to your regular court prior to no fault being made and prior to the child support agency being made. So that was their answer to kind of, getting rid of the constipation, so to speak.
First of all, there's the concept of no-fault justice. No-fault justice is a contradiction of terms. It's an oxymoron. You can't have no-fault justice. In the law, you have to define what is a legal transgression, or
That's actually a really interesting thing to think about philosophically. Like there is no such thing as a no-fault justice. So like why should the courts be able to even be able to make rulings on a no-fault divorce in the first place? Because if you're bringing something to a court looking for justice and no injustice has been committed, as is what the default of the court says, then is it even really valid to begin with? And the actual legalese that they use for no fault when they first created it, and even still to this day, if you see a divorce order, is it cites irreconcilable differences. So the court still technically has to put something there for why the marriage is dissolving. And it's usually irreconcilable differences. And that is like the actual no fault language.
Justice is not possible. So the courts don't really arrive at they don't even attempt to administer justice. They apply an administrative procedure. Every family law case, every case of divorce has an automatic outcome. The outcome is predetermined. That's not justice. That's not due process of law. There's only one possible outcome. A divorce is granted. And it's granted without any reference whatsoever to the wrongdoing, the violation of the marital contract, adultery, anything else. It has no reference to the process itself. The divorce will be granted, and it's basically up to the judge to decide how everything is divvied up. And there's no particular guidelines. There's no particular rules by which it's divvied up. It's just the preference of the judge. So it's a free for all. It's utter legal nihilism. And what it effectively is corruption, because it's the outcomes, the cases are determined according to what is in the best interest of the lawyers, the bar associations, the judges, the psychotherapists, and all of the others in the divorce industry.
I'm glad you used that word industry, because that's what it is. It is an industry just as much as, an automotive accident injury attorney is part of an industry. He didn't mention that there's no guidelines. There technically is guidelines. There are the actual legal codes. There are the guideline calculations that child support uses. They have that for spousal too. But he's not wrong in saying that there isn't. I mean, it technically is all up to the judge. The judge can deviate from guidelines if they find it appropriate. And if you look at, certain aspects of the law, they have different reasons why they can deviate, but sometimes they're pretty open-ended. So it really is, a lot of it's up to the judge, but I'm kind of conflicted on that because I feel like sometimes judges have their hands tied behind their back. And, ever since we had the introduction of child support guidelines and stuff like that, it almost gave judges less dexterity because they're still beholden to this calculator somewhat. So
how do we get here? Because I know, like in the 19th century, it was quite difficult to get a divorce. You had to have a reason to get a divorce, and I've read some interesting studies of the era saying that, like, even if like one spouse, confessed to having an affair in order to be, they might actually say, no, you didn't really have an affair. You're manufacturing a pretext.
That would be called perjury. And perjury was a thing that happened, and it was one of the reasons why no fault was introduced, because couples that did want to get divorced and the courts were not letting them would eventually work together to make something up. And sometimes that would involve the lawyers and the judges too, colluding.
You're manufacturing, you would lie that you'd had to do something wrong in order to get out of this marriage. And so it was extremely difficult to dissolve a marriage in a lot of ways. How do we get to this regime that you're talking about from there?
Well, some of these stories about how we got there are, I think, to a large extent, mythology. They're revisionist history that was put in place after the fact. These horror stories about how couples had to make up, adulterous affairs that never happened and things like that. This is something that the bar associations cooked up. I'm not sure how much truth there is really in that.
That's interesting. So he has a very unique perspective on that. He's basically saying it's mostly a kind of, you can almost say, a marketing ploy cooked up by the American Bar Association to get no fault through. It almost seems like he might kind of be insinuating that the lawyers, the American Bar Association had a huge incentive to get no fault through because it would be, possibly profitable or easier for them or some reason. I do want to point to this. This is just this is on the Wikipedia page for no fault divorce. And they do quote a Supreme Court of California Associate Justice. So one thing, I'll read this here just so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. Bypassing the showing of fault requirements for divorce. And this is basically in a list of reasons why no fault was popularized. These requirements could be problematic if both spouses were at fault or if neither spouse had committed a legally culpable act, but both spouses desired a divorce by mutual consent. Lawyers began to advise their clients on how to manufacture legal fictions to bypass the statutory requirements, with the result that by the 1920s, the actual operation of the legal system was completely at odds with statute and case law. So they're saying the way the legal system's actually operating is at odds with the statute. So divorces are going through when they really shouldn't be, and it's probably because of perjury. One method popular in New York was referred to as collusive adultery. So this is going to be your collusion, in which the husband would check into a hotel with the mistress obtained for the occasion. A photographer, also obtained for the occasion, would suddenly appear out of nowhere to take snapshots of the husband and his mistress, in flagrant delicto. Upon presentation of the photos in court, the judge would convict the husband of adultery, and the couple could be divorced. In many other states, especially California, the most popular allegation for divorce was cruelty. So that's going to be your abuse, right? Nowadays, they call that domestic violence, abuse, which was then unavailable in New York. For example, in 1950, wives pleaded cruelty as the basis for 70% of San Francisco divorce cases. So what's kind of interesting about that is it makes me wonder how accurate the abuse statistics are, because I think one of the things that no fault is celebrated for is that having no fault divorce helped to lower abuse rates. But if a lot of the abuse rates were just collusion between these two spouses that wanted to get divorced from each other and it actually didn't happen, then that would give us an inflated abuse statistic, which maybe didn't really actually happen. So that's I wouldn't know how we find out if that's true or not, but research like this that says 70% of them it is what they pleaded. Some of these would be legitimate and some of them wouldn't be if there's collusion. Wives would regularly testify to the same facts. Their husbands swore at them, hit them, and generally treated them terribly. This procedure was described by Supreme Court of California Associate Justice Stanley Mosk. Every day in every superior court in the state, the same melancholy charade was played. The innocent spouse, generally the wife, and this is innocent in quotes, would take the stand and, to the accompanying cacophony of sobbing and nose-blowing, testify under the deft guidance of an attorney to the spousal conduct that she deemed cruel. So this is an actual associate justice, okay? Someone that would make decisions on these. And he's probably annoyed by the fact that the wife has hired an attorney that's really telling her exactly what to say to navigate and thread through the specifics of the law. And the justice might even be unable to undo that because what the attorney's telling her is so like by the book or well advised that the judge can't be like, you're wrong, because he's not able to find any actual legal standing to be like, no, there's evidence here, or there's this that says you're wrong, because he can't prove it. So he noticed this. An even simpler practice for people living in states where divorce was difficult to obtain was to go forum shopping. And this is what I called state shopping. But forum shopping is more particular here because it could be people in the same state, and they just go to different counties. So you got Superior Court of Sacramento, then there's the Superior Court of San Francisco, LA Superior Court. So they might hear that there's a judge down there that's actually more willing to let some of these divorces through. So they'll just file their case there. This meant one of the parties would move to another state where divorce laws were less restrictive. Stay there long enough to become a resident, then file for divorce there. Nevada was extremely popular for this purpose, as starting in the 1930s, its residency requirement was only 6 weeks. During this period, the city of Reno openly advertised itself as the divorce capital of the world. Wow. And gained a national reputation as a divorce mill. For some couples, if there really was no problem in settling the issues of their marriage, a weekend trip to Mexico was also an option. Or in some cases, a party deciding they wanted to marry someone else could combine a filing for divorce and a new marriage in one trip to Mexico. Wow. As no fault became near universal, the need to use Nevada or Mexico to evade restrictive divorce laws became less and less necessary. So I just wanted to share that with you because I know he's saying some of this is mythological, and maybe to some extent it is. Like, I don't want to doubt him. You know, he seems like a very well read on the subject. It's possible it was blown out of proportion, and maybe, you know, it's the lesser of two evils. Maybe having, I don't know, collusion and perjury there as a problem it could be more conducive. Though it's really hard to say. I mean, if we had at-fault divorce now, everybody has a cell phone. There'd probably be so many false accusations thrown around, and the courts probably still couldn't be able to handle it. Yo, Will, welcome in, man. Reno is terrible. Reno is a terrible town. I mean, you know, I've only ever been there for freaking seeing like Circus or something, and from what I've seen, I cannot debate your opinion, sir. I believe that is a true statement. In fact, as soon as I hear Reno, I can smell secondhand smoke and a room that smells like an ashtray, like a motel room or something.
History. What's undoubted, what's beyond dispute, is that the no-fault divorce system was sold to the public under false pretenses. It was sold dishonestly to the public. We were told that it would be divorced by mutual consent. It was not divorce by mutual consent. It is unilateral divorce.
See, if that's true, I mean, I wasn't around for that, but if they really sold it that it's divorce by mutual consent, then that's a problem, because that's not what no-fault divorce is. It's one person wants to go, they file, the court takes care of the rest.
It is forced divorce. It is divorce. Basically, one spouse can dissolve the marriage contract for any reason or no reason. In other words, the marriage contract is simply not a enforceable contract in the law. It's a violation of the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution, in fact. So what they basically did, Maggie Gallagher called it the abolition of marriage. And in legal terms, that's precisely what it was. It was the abolition of marriage as a legally enforceable contract. So basically, if you want out of the marriage, you just walk away, and the judge will ratify what you've done. And your action in abrogating the contract without grounds, your action committing adultery and deserting the home, any of that has no bearing on whether you get the children, whether you get the assets of the marriage. You can unilaterally break the contract. You can have affairs. and you can still get custody of the children. And overwhelmingly, of course, it's mothers that move these divorces because they know that they will get the children, and they will get generous child support awards. Although in some instances the roles are reversed, and the father perpetrates it and gets the rewards for it.
Typically happens if the father is not the sole provider. So if he's married to someone and he's not the supporting party, but she has a job, possibly even makes more than him. Yes, it really is not gender specific. The laws are not actually written gender biased, but it is provider biased. And most guys know that the expectation is on the guy to be the provider. And that's typically what a lot of the red pill manosphere stuff is about. It's about feminists who kind of want their cake and eat it too. They want equal opportunity employment, but they also want to marry someone that makes more than them. And that's how you get the skewed standards. So, I think something that's more specifically gender biased would be paternity, in the sense of some of those laws being too heavy handed.
Yeah. So when did this, I know supposedly Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce law. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah, in 1969, and he later regretted it. He expressed regret for having done so. I don't think he really understood it.
That's actually interesting that he says that. So Ronald Reagan did sign. He actually did sign that in 1969. But I mean, yeah, he did sign it. He probably could have chose to pocket veto that a bit, but technically what happened was, if you guys remember Governor Jerry Brown Jr., Edmund Jerry Brown Jr., that was a more recent governor. Okay. And his father was actually governor of California also. That's Edmund Brown Sr., I guess you can say. And he was actually governor right before Ronald Reagan was governor. And this whole sort of train for no-fault divorce was already kind of leaving the station by the time Ronald Reagan was in office. And Ronald Reagan, I think at the time, was a Democrat, and then he later became, a Republican. So I'm sure by the time he was a Republican, he said he felt bad about it once it was becoming obvious what it did. Let me read to you actually some information about Governor Brown. 3 years after Governor Brown, well, here's a quote from him. And this is coming from this was a document prepared for the Assembly Judiciary Committee for the California State Legislature, and it actually had to come up again in California, and they were hearing whether or not they should go back to at-fault divorce. So a lot of the legislatures there needed some kind of document to get up to speed, and this is something that was given them. But here is the quote: "The time has come to acknowledge that our present social and legal procedures for dealing with divorce are no longer adequate." This is a quote from Governor Edmund G. Brown, Sr., 1966, explaining his support of no-fault divorce reforms. And, in that quote, we can see why he's saying that. He's saying that because of collusion, perjury, the courts are backed up, people on the ground are doing forum shopping, and what's reflected in the culture is not really what's in the laws, and people are hiring attorneys to get them around the laws, and sometimes judges are part of that. So Governor Brown Sr. knows this. 3 years after Governor Brown urged reforming California's fault-based divorce law, Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act of 1969 into law, making California the first no-fault divorce state in the nation. Or, looked at by some in another way, on September 5th, 1969, with the stroke of his pen, California Governor Ronald Reagan wiped out the moral basis for marriage in America. Since California's historic divorce reform, every state has enacted some form of no-fault divorce. So I just wanted to present this, for some extent, just so we can see. Yes, it was Ronald Reagan, but, they were working on it for a while before.
I don't think anybody understood it. There was no debate at the time. There's never been any debate since. In 1969, we were obsessed with Vietnam, with the civil rights movement, with the campus unrest, with Woodstock, and so forth. Everybody's attention was on that, and the culture was very tolerant of sexual experimentation, sexual liberation, and this was something that the feminists actually had cooked this up decades earlier, in the 1940s. They had drafted these laws, and they were just looking for an opportunity to slip them in. And they did. They slipped them in the late 60s, early 70s. Nobody really understood what they were for. There was one suit in the Texas legislature where the Texas legislature was sued by an attorney for deceptively passing the law deceptively, claiming that it was divorce by mutual consent, when in fact there was no such thing. It was divorce, unilateral divorce, without any grounds.
Yeah, I mean, that really what it is. No fault. It sounds like no fault insurance.
That's where it came from. It was pioneered by car insurance.
But it's, but at least in insurance, we know there was an accident. It's somewhere along the lines. At least you're fine. But there doesn't even have to be like an incident here.
No, that's correct.
It's like anybody who wants to, and I always, I've been down on the church for a long time in their teachings on marriage, and you go listen to any church sermon series on marriage, and they'll always say marriage isn't a contract; it's a covenant. It's way more than a contract. And I would say, wait a minute, that's not true. Marriage in America is less than a contract.
Yes,
because you can actually, if you have a contract, you can actually enforce it. Whereas if you're married, you basically have zero rights in that. Essentially, just
well, yeah. Typically, in a contract, both parties have protections if one or the other party reneges on the deal. I guess. I mean, if you have like a business contract between two companies, typically there are clauses in there that says, if this company does something like neglects and it leads to like a waste of money or they're not kind of holding up due diligence or whatever, like they can be held accountable by the law, and that keeps both of the companies giving their best effort to whatever their joint venture is. In marriage, that's not really the case.
No rights whatsoever.
Anymore.
And
that's correct. The churches. These are the church's weasel words. They talk about it being a covenant rather than a contract, and it's far more important and so forth. Just as you say, and in fact, the churches use this as an excuse to do nothing. Mm-hmm. They consecrate a marriage. They claim that this is before God and witnessed by the congregation and so forth, and it's inviolable until death do us part and all that. And then when the state tears up the contract, the churches do nothing. They don't intervene on behalf of the aggrieved party or the wronged party or both parties. They do absolutely nothing. It's the most shameful thing I've ever seen by churches, and to me it explains why people are walking away from churches in huge numbers and why people don't go to church, because when it comes to mean something to them in the course of their lives, their children, their livelihood, their home, and the church is looking out the window and refuses to do anything about it. Then people conclude that the church is useless, and they're right in many ways.
Yeah, I was just reading this article in First Things magazine, which is a conservative magazine, and it was their explainer on how Boris Johnson is able to get married in a Catholic church, married in the Catholic Cathedral in London, even though he'd been married twice before. And they went through this, process. Well, what you have to understand is that in the Middle Ages, the church said that privately contracted marriages weren't valid for people who were in the church, and you had to have the church's permission. It had to be like a church ceremony. And since he was baptized Catholic, even though he never practiced it, technically he was supposed to have gotten married in a church. So his previous marriages did. It just seems like that anytime you want, right, there's some out.
That's interesting too. Because more recently, like, I guess the criticism of the church, and if I understand it correctly, obviously I don't live that life, but marriage is, I think, a sacrament if you're a Catholic, and it's supposed to be like for life, so people can get divorced in the secular court at the state, but the church is still supposed to uphold that they're married. And then typically what happens is this one or the other spouse gets remarried to someone else through the state, and then they're kind of living, I guess, in sin or fornicating. It's technically they're fornicating, which is like adultery. So then the church is supposed to say, hey, you're not allowed to take communion anymore, which is something big that they do. But more recently, what they've seen is the church has kind of made it easier to get annulments. And annulments are a way of saying that, like, the marriage was invalid from the beginning. So it's not a divorce, it's an annulment. And then once they get an annulment, since that first marriage was never valid, then they can come back and get married to their, I guess, church married to their new spouse, and then take the Eucharist again, communion, and all that stuff. So that's probably what Baskerville and Aaron Renn are kind of talking about a little bit.
That even in the Catholic Church, where it seems like there's this, this theology, marriage cannot be dissolved ever. It's a permanent sacramental union or whatever, even if you're not a Christian. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, well, we annulled this. This didn't really count. Violated canon law here. And what I've found it really interesting is, this idea about 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and it varies by study, but it's one of the best known findings in social science. I think that women, are disproportionately are the ones that desire to exit their marriage. I have never once seen that statistic mentioned in any Christian literature, sermon, etc. Never.
Right.
I'll get these marriage books.
That's an interesting thing to think about, because it's often the Christian tradicons that are especially opposed to red pill talking points, and they want men to get married. I think they should really be advocating for people to get covenant marriages instead of the state marriages, but for some reason they don't do a good job of separating those two. So I'm sure guys like him find it very frustrating.
Conservative path, and they're full. I'll get like Tim Keller's marriage book, The Meaning of Marriage. It's full of statistics. There's all kinds of data in there.
Yeah.
But they don't mention this. It's like they don't even want to acknowledge it. And
excuse me, I was just going to say, I was going to amend that statistic. In my earlier book, I showed through various means that when including the testimony of attorneys, that when children are involved, it's virtually 100% of the marriages are moved by women.
That's actually really interesting. I would love to see the stats on that. I got a loud car going crazy out there. But when children are involved, it's virtually 100% of women who file for the divorce. That's really interesting. That statistic should be more well known.
Yeah, it's overwhelmingly. And there's a study there's one study that shows that.
And it would make sense, because it's like, if you're the man, you're the provider, and then you got kids, it's like, I think guys are way more willing to put up with stuff in a marriage, mostly because they have a lot more to lose, so you're way more invested in it, that you're not just gonna go. Dan the Man says the reason why is because they cater to women, and I think he is talking about the church there. I was trying to bring your chat on screen. I'm having trouble. I'm going to try one more time to get that set up. Then maybe we can get some of your guys' chats on screen. But yeah, I often think about that too when it comes to the churches, because I find it interesting. And it's like, I guess I can see why they would, I don't know, like, what the right word for it is, but it's just like, I can almost see why, because it's like, okay, if they don't, and then all the women like leave the church and join the hippie movement, then maybe they're kind of shit, crap out of luck here, and they start losing like women churchgoers. Then that's another problem that they got to solve. I can't get this little Twidget thing to work, but I'll just have to shout you guys out and read your guys' comments if I can't get it on screen.
The parent that expects to get custody of the children is the one that files for divorce, almost always.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some studies to that effect, that, it's, people that, divorce is initiated at a time when it's maximally convenient for the appropriation of assets and children and things of that nature. And again, I mean, you could argue, okay, who legally files for divorce is only one indicator. You'd have to look at, well, was there adultery involved? Was there...
That's the James Sexton point. He mentioned that on his discussion with Matt Walsh. And he mentioned that, yes, that statistic exists, but that just means they filed for it, and it doesn't indicate who actually led to the breakdown of the divorce. And now you're at this at fault discussion again. But I don't know. I feel like they can't statistically prove that. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and just assume, well, the vast majority of them is because the woman was right to divorce it. The fact is we just don't know.
Abuse involved, these other things. But I just find it so revealing that they won't even give you the statistic. The fact that they're hiding the statistic tells you something profound. And well, I have had some interesting reactions when I tell people that, because I've written it in my site and in some podcasts. And almost any time I bring up that stat and talk about women initiated most divorces. By the way, if women filed for the same divorce at the same rate as men, half of divorces would disappear overnight. But invariably, I start getting people saying, these men deserved it. They were having affairs. They were abused. They were all these things. It's like they assert. They never say, hey, did you see this study over here, or did you see this over here? It's always just some naked assertion that, not all, of course, but that most of these, or a huge chunk of these, must be justified. And I just really find that interesting. It's like they're totally incapable of believing that women may just simply dump or abandon their families. In fact, all their sermons are about the opposite. It's all about, the husband. As I always say, there's this ministry from the 90s. It was so big, the Promise Keepers. It's like men need to be promise keepers. But
Right.
nobody ever asked women to keep their promises, which I find is...
So guys in the red pill space are, I guess, aware of or tired of, it's like, well, she left or she filed, but you got to ask why, or like, why did she cheat on you, or why did this or why did that? It was your fault. Or they'll say, well, it's easy if men don't cheat on their women, then they won't leave them. But it's like, then there's plenty of cases of men who did everything, but their wives just didn't want to stay with them. No fault lets them go.
Is really kind of an interesting one. Why do you think it is? And we're going to talk a little bit about what you said.
Yo, Dart Sidonius, welcome in, man. Big shout out to you. I wish I can get your comment on screen. I'll just read it aloud. I think it's because they can't upset the women who make up the majority of the churchgoers now. First they lost the men in church, and now the women are the main ones left, and they can't anger them. Yeah, it's true. And, I don't want to say it's for money, but it's just like the church, it's not a business. I think that's kind of mean and a lazy characterization, but there is such a thing as a collection plate, as donations that come from the churchgoers to the church that the church probably uses to upkeep activities and things like that. And if they're losing congregants and all that kind of stuff, then, they're losing those, I don't know if they call them tithes or what, but they're losing that to other, possibly other churches, or just nobody gets them. So there are these, I guess, practical problems that religious institutions have to solve.
Saying here, why is it that the supposedly family values people, are they don't want to take this on, they don't want to touch it, and they seem to be totally in denial about how the world works?
Yeah, no, it's astounding. I talk about that a little bit in the book. I've got various theories about this. It is really amazing. I mean, conservatives are full of bemoaning and lamenting, and they're full of cliches, the family this and the family that. And if we don't preserve the family, we're going to lose all our freedom, and civilization's going to decline,
Right.
and so forth. And we're not preserving the family. We've created a government machine for destroying the family. It is taking away our liberties, and it is causing the decline of our civilization. And conservatives don't want to hear about it. They don't want to listen. Their own prophecies are being fulfilled, and yet they don't want to. They don't want to do anything about it. It's amazing. I've never seen a more spineless bunch of people than the conservatives who deal with family issues, especially in the United, above all in the United States. It's amazing. There was even a scholarly journal that I quote, a scholarly article by a secular political scientist, who's just astounded by this. He documents how the Family Research Council, the Focus on the Family, all of these so-called pro-family groups do nothing about divorce. They touch all kinds of issues that have nothing to do with the family, or little
Right.
to do, marginally connected with the family. And yet something so central as divorce, and they do absolutely nothing about it. And he's astounded by this political scientist, Mark Smith is his name, and he's writing Political Science Quarterly, I quote it. and he can't believe what he sees. And as a fellow political scientist, I'm even more a Christian. A Christian one. I'm even more astounded. It's just, I mean, there's various hypotheses. There's a lot of conservative Republican lawyers who make a lot of money on divorce. That's one reason.
It's interesting to think about, because at first I want to be like, well, it's because, they lost so badly to feminism and secularism. They have no legal pathway to be able to have any authority to do anything on that. But then at the same time, I don't know. You have conservative lawyers and all these kinds of people, and it's like they don't put any kind of platform down for changing family law. At least it doesn't seem that way. Like there's nothing for the normal guy to vote for as far as a platform goes. It's, they're usually concerned more with abortion and things like that, and they're not looking at custody or paternity fraud or child support systems that are too invasive. So there is a very noticeable absence.
There's a lot of conservative Republican women who understand the power of divorce and the power it gives them, power that it gives them over men, the way that it enables them to manipulate men. And many, conservative men are terrified of this. The late Phyllis Schlafly was one of the few writers, conservative activists, who faced this forthrightly in her book, Who Killed the American Family, I think it's called. She faced it directly. It happened to her own son, and she was appalled. She ran into resistance from within her own organization. She ran into resistance from other conservatives. I watched her trying to convince Senator Santorum, one of the great self-styled champions of the family in the U.S. Senate. He wrote a book about the family, how important it is. And yet I watched her. She stood there and appealed to him. Phyllis Schlafly, one of the most, 20 or 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century. I mean, she's been, loved and adored and admired by many, many people, even those who don't agree with her. One of the highly effective, political activists of our time. She stood there before Senator Santorum trying to convince him of this, and I listened to the conversation. He just blew her off. He just ignored her and walked away. I was just astounded by this.
When I was reading Charles Taylor's book, A Secular Age, he sort of started talking a little bit about this in a different context, how the church became very skeptical of men. And he quoted a book by this guy named Callum Brown, who's a British academic. It was called The Death of Christian Britain. And I bought the book and I read it, and I was really blown away. And he just documents essentially in the evangelical literature of the 19th century in England how there was this real shift to essentially demonizing men and blaming them.
That sounds like a really good book. I mean, it would be cool, like, especially if that book dives pretty deep down in a lot of like actual source literature for how the church viewed men. It could explain a lot of things.
For everything. And some of this was probably rooted, I think it's probably rooted in the industrial transition where, now you're not on the farms anymore. There's no more homestead farm. We have this urbanizing population. And you do have these kind of men who go to the factory, they get their paycheck, they go straight to the bar and blow it. They're gambling. They are being socially irresponsible. You see the temperance movement and things like that arising out of it. But in essence, right, it's this idea that, the woman is the pure guardian of the domestic sphere, and the husband and the father is the great threat to it. And that really, I think, permeates everything that they do. And it's certainly the church in America is very baby boomer dominated, like most institutions in society. And all these conservative baby boomers are like the biggest white knights in the world. It's
the first one that comes to mind is like Dr. Phil. Like I can just imagine Dr. Phil hearing all this stuff. Or I guess it kind of reminds me, I think Rollo went on the Dr. Phil show, and I could just hear Dr. Phil Phil just saying kind of his boomer stuff, you know what I mean, and just like, the man, it's a man's responsibility.
It's like that's kind of what they are. It's like, they're always going to jump to the defense of any woman anywhere. You see them online all the time. You get somebody gets in an argument on Twitter. You get into a dispute with some woman on Twitter, which I don't personally do, but you see people do it, and all of a sudden, all her defenders start coming in. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? But
reminds me of like a Pearl tweet or something. If somebody calls out like a TradCon woman.
I think they honestly believe it because, you sometimes hear these stories, like these kind of men's rights activist stories, like the conservative boomer guy who believed, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, he truly believes, well, I'm a good father, I'm a good husband. This would never happen to me. One of these miscarriages of justice, that happens to the deadbeat dads. That happens to the abusers.
Exactly. That's exactly I think that's why child support is so harsh. It's because a lot of Americans really believe that it's like, oh, it's those people. They just can't get it together. And they had no problem making it so tough on them. And then they never realized it would be used against them on the sort of nicer side of town. They just thought it was for those people on the other side of the railroad tracks. And now here we are, and everybody's getting screwed by it. Doesn't matter how high up the chain you are.
And until they actually experience it, they literally cannot even comprehend what happens.
Right. And even when they experience it, they often cover it up. I've been contacted over the years by a number of important conservative activists and political figures who have asked me, about the courts and, how they work and what's going on because they've been caught up in it.
Dan the man, you just freaking read my mind. I was literally gonna say that, but yeah, you beat me to the punch. Dan the man says Steven Crowder. Yeah, he really is a kind of classic example of this, because as soon as that footage, the edited footage came out or whatever, everybody, and when I say everybody, I just mean like the other conservatives like Candace Owens and just everybody came together to destroy that man like a bunch of piranhas eating a carcass or something. And no one's ever really went back and made amends or anything like that. So he's the perfect example, and it's like they have to demonize him, because if they don't demonize him, they risk, I guess, admitting that there are cracks in their worldview or that their worldview is fallible, but they can't because it has to be perfect because it's biblically sound and it's divine, you know what I mean? So Steven Crowder must have done something wrong. And it may not even be truly biblical. It might just be, runoff from kind of chivalric structures that came, a few hundred, in the Middle Ages kind of coming towards now, but they really just, it had to be his fault for them to be able to keep doing what they're doing. So they had to excommunicate him quickly from the circle.
And I've tried to get them to come out and oppose this publicly. They're political figures who talk, about the right to life and the importance of the family and, the unborn child and so forth. And they refuse to do it. They refuse to come out. And
Dart Sidonia says, yep, then it turned out his wife was ordered not to delete the rest of the footage, and she did it anyway. Also, those tweets showing she really wasn't this poor defenseless woman, LOL. Yeah, probably the $25,000 a month temporary support helps too. Finley O's came from CGA. Big shout out to you. I appreciate any of the folks that come from CGA. And man, Coach is one of my favorite channels to watch. I do have his book right here. I actually have both of his books. I still got to read De-Evolution, but I do got the Free Agent Lifestyle. I love Coach, man. I also have Devolution, but De-Evolution. Excuse me. But we will get there. So I appreciate you being in here. Dan the man says it's definitely not biblical. And I can't speak to that too much. I mean, I have a passing understanding of Christian religion, but I believe you when you say that. I believe that. You know what I mean? It's just there's been this hijacking, so to speak, and it's bad.
And
by the way, about Coach, I really need to do a dedicated reaction to his reaction of me on Pearl. I did rewatch it recently. I was feeling kind of down and maybe even unmotivated. I had a pretty long couple of weeks, but that's all excuses. But I rewatched Coach's reaction to my interview with Pearl, and it helped kind of get me back up. So I even, I even recorded it just so I can have it, just in case anything ever happens. God forbid. Let me knock on wood to Coach's channel, but it put some life back in me, so I'm grateful for him.
Adopt a political position or criticize the courts or criticize the judges or anyone, and I'm just amazed by this. I can name you quite prominent people who have been influenced by this, and just political men who've been taken through the divorce court ringer and just keep it all quiet, hush it up as much as they can, rather than.
I feel like they feel like, excuse me. I think they feel like they have to do that, like keep it as quiet as possible, because they have this reputation to protect, and there's like this in-group in the conservative sphere, and if you just don't match up to that, then you're out. It almost reminds me of, I don't know why, it makes me think of this Simpsons episode. I don't know if you remember when Milhouse's parents got divorced. For those of you guys who watched Simpsons back in the day. And, Marge and Homer throw a dinner party, and it essentially leads to Milhouse's parents getting a divorce. But one of the things that's kind of funny is that Milhouse's dad, after the divorce, gets called into a meeting at work with his boss, and he's like, "You're firing me?" And the boss at the cracker factory is like, "Crackers are a family food." And basically, since he got divorced, they're like, "We can't have you on board anymore." But that's what it's like. That's what conservative media is like today.
Than publicly criticizing it.
Well, I think you sort of say that, like, once you're caught up in the system, you can't criticize it. I mean, because if you say anything, this judge can literally do anything
That's Steven Crowder's problem right now. I mean, I don't even think he can really publicly comment on
they
it.
want. And
Well, that's true, except that they also you can also criticizing the judge can also give you some cover. I mean, it can also provide some leverage.
I wonder if he kind of means like the court of public opinion. So if you have a judge that's treating you unfairly and you put it out there and there's enough scrutiny looking at this particular judge and what they're going to do, it might possibly help. Maybe you can even say there's an element of that in the Johnny Depp, Amber Heard domestic violence trial. Possibly. Sometimes I guess you could say if it becomes a public spectacle, there might be some form of protection there.
It depends on the circumstances, of course. But a prominent political figure who criticized the family courts and the judges would probably be fairly safe, I think, in doing so. You're right; the judges have huge power, but they also fear criticism, and they do everything they can.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. They do punish ordinary fathers for criticizing them. Websites have been judges close websites. They jail fathers for criticizing them. That's documented in my book. Parents generally have been jailed for, I know a mother in one case, jailed for criticizing judges, jailed for not paying an attorney that never hired, that sort of thing.
Right.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, you mentioned the pro-life movement, and I really do think there is a crack in the foundation of all these social conservative movements, all of them. Not to say that they're fraudulent or illegitimate, but I do think that there is that they do have internal contradictions that they don't really think about. So I go back to, I think abortion is a good one, because I go back to the 2015 debate when Donald Trump was asked, should a woman who gets an abortion be punished? And you could tell he wasn't really anti-abortion.
I don't know why. This question reminds me of something. It's one of those questions that are specifically designed to put whoever's being asked back up against a wall, being forced to choose this side or this side. Like, do you think abortion is good or bad? And you better tell us now. Like, that's what that question's designed as. And it reminds me of when Jordan Peterson came to Sacramento. I actually purchased this ticket to see Jordan Peterson. I think it was in like 2018. And we couldn't have cameras in there or anything. And like, I wish I would have maybe even secretly recorded, but I couldn't because that was against the rules. And they checked everybody before. But at the end of Jordan Peterson's lecture, this was in downtown Sacramento, he took some questions, and one person asked him, do you believe in the literal, death and resurrection of Jesus? You know what I mean? Like, very specifically. And it reminds me of this because up until that time, like, a lot of Jordan Peterson's work on YouTube, even before he got big, was more so, it was almost about like esoteric interpretations of biblical stories. Like it's about Carl Jung and this like psychological understanding of that, like, you know, the biblical religious stories have on our psychologies and how it applies to our lives, like in a very everyday sense. So that someone finally asked him, like, do you literally believe in this? And I still remember Jordan Peterson launched into this like 20-minute answer of answering this guy's question, and he didn't really answer the question.
Because you could almost like the gears start spinning, and he's like, "Wow, what?"
Uh-oh.
You know,
Yes.
I guess if abortion is murder, and I think that's wrong. Yes, the answer is yes. And then he just got pilloried by, among other people, you know, all the pro-life people, and that's how you know he wasn't pro-life, because the National Right to Life issued a press release that stated explicitly that women who procure abortions are victims. That is to say, they have no moral responsibility for their actions.
They have to believe that, and then it has to necessarily be the man's fault that happened. It's the man's fault for not stepping up, that the woman, without any accountability, had to do this.
And so I think that shows that the supposedly pro-life, there's something wrong in their entire thought process, that they have to create all these disconnects. They have to claim that like abortion is murder, but then the person who actually gets the abortion has no responsibility. I just think I think the pro-life movement is very incoherent, completely incoherent. And I think that goes through all of these social conservative things. They're just really, they're slogans, and nobody's ever really thought about them.
Man, that's really interesting. You know, I actually did a walking around street interview. This is like real early on in my channel. It's one of like my earlier vids, but there was a abortion protest. I think it was when Roe v. Wade was getting overturned, or when the memo leaked out for that. And I actually went around with the microphone, and I discussed or asked questions to both sides, the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers, and they were there in downtown Sacramento arguing with each other. And maybe one day I'll react to that, but it's kind of long, and you know, the editing. Well, not that my editing is great now, but it's very early on in my YouTube stuff. But sometimes I go back and watch it, because I did talk to a lot of pro-lifers there and heard their perspective, and it was a fun experience for me. Deanne the Man says, the problem why tradcons lose the culture war is because they have double standard logic. Yeah, I think this abortion thing is a great just example of that. They refuse to hold the woman accumble.
And they can't bring themselves to think about them.
And these have consequences.
It's an interesting thing to think about, too, because it's like, I don't know why they do that. Maybe it's like if they feel like if they demonize the woman, she's just going to be kind of pushed into the arms of the feminist progressives waiting for her on the other side. So it's like if they feel like they have to come to this woman with like this open-hearted, everlasting love sort of approach of like, hey, you know, it's okay. We know you're a victim, you know what I mean? And we're here to help. I got a buddy. I kind of wish I don't know if he still does it. And he always invited me out, too, to bring out my camera and microphone and get some. I wish I would have did this, but I never did. But he's like a pretty, you can say, like, dyed-in-the-wool conservative Christian. And he would go with his group of folks from the church, and they would actually stand outside of the Planned Parenthood abortion clinics here in Sacramento with their signs. And, man, these guys would actually, like, try to intercept people walking into the clinic and try to like have like one last appeal of like, hey, you know, are you sure you want to do this? Like, let's all pray for you. There's resources for you. I always kind of wished I went out there and got some of that documented, but maybe I'll reach out to him. But anyways, yeah, that sort of pitch of like, no, we love you and everything just kind of reminds me, because they kind of had a way of trying to sell not getting an abortion to them. Doris Donia says, Dan the Man, I agree. I think it's also because they want to absorb some of the domestic values in the culture to try to be friendly, quote unquote, with the broader culture, in this case, feminism. I think that makes sense, too. Because it's like, maybe they feel like their hands are tied behind their back. If they don't, they lose people. Like we saw last week on the stream, we were looking at It's Complicated actually came in here and he asked a question about the church's something about their shift on LGBT, and we looked up a article of like the Pope kind of having a more almost accepting positive view of LGBTQ stuff, and it's almost like if they don't, they just push more people away and they lose more congregants, and they're just caught in this tough place.
They lose almost every battle. I mean, this is if you look at the long run, how in all of these controversies, same-sex marriage and transgenderism and all abortion included, the pro-life, the pro-family groups, the professional conservatives, the professional activists, in the long run, they might win little legal skirmishes here and there, but in the long run, they lose every battle, and they've lost every battle for the last few decades, and it's quite clear. You're right. You're absolutely right. They're full of inconsistencies. They're run by, they're run by big money foundations and so forth.
See, that's something to dive into right there. Those big money foundations and how those actually work, like under the hood. I would like to know that. And sometimes, like, I have this kind of gnawing feeling that the reason red pillars aren't making any more strides, I mean, they are amongst men, but like as far as political strides goes, is that we haven't successfully figured out how to use those actual political mechanisms. Like this year for this election, I don't even really think I'm going to vote. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that we've been kind of trained that if we vote once every 4 years, it means we're like politically active. But I really don't think it does. I think it's almost just like a cheap excuse of like, oh, so you finally got off the couch once in 4 years to vote. It's like, you really aren't participating in politics. And sometimes I think there's these other pathways that if we just knew how to take advantage of them, almost like how feminists were able to back in their time, and create better lobbying groups and really be able to put pressure on politicians, put pressure on government, maybe we could make some change. But it's like, it does require a form of education, and we have to be careful not to fall in with grifters, because suddenly one guy comes out and it's just like, hey, I made a lobby organization, I need you guys to crowdfund me. I think about it sometimes, but it's just like, I don't know, I don't want to make promises I can't keep, and I would be afraid if like that became the next grift in the space. I don't even want to say those words, because it's like, I would hate to see that,
And they many times they are political operations rather than true grassroots citizens groups. There's often a kingpin behind them, a political operator behind them.
Well, certainly a lot of them are funded by wealthy donors. They're they're backed by big money people, which there's no shame in that per se. But
no, that's right. There's nothing wrong with it. But they claim to be grassroots groups, and they're really not. And in many ways, they're often more concerned with building a political empire for themselves, and giving themselves quite generous salaries in the process, rather than actually being effective in preserving the family.
See, that's one thing. Like I actually think like Red Pill is a very organic movement. It is grassroots, but then you have red pillars kind of reaching this critical mass, and then all of a sudden you have like these big groups kind of coming in to try to hijack the space. You have big funded tradcon conservatives trying to come in and hijack the red pillars while they're still small, and this is kind of creating a friction, so to speak. I was just working on a video. I just finished it, but I was gonna probably upload it after the stream. Part of me wanted to upload it tomorrow, but I got to work on a thumbnail, and it's a little bit about tradcons hijacking a red pill space. So I don't want to give away too much on that, but you guys might find it interesting. Dart Sidonius says, man, not going to vote either. Once that Princeton study came out that showed that what normal people wanted had little to no effect on policies, it was obvious no party will get anything done. That sounds like a really interesting study. Dart Sidonius says, it was shown only lobby groups, corporations, etc. got their way. Yeah, see, and it's just like there's that lobby group again, or the foundation that he was talking about, and it's like, I feel so ignorant about how to actually participate in the political system, because voting is not it. It's not it.
Yeah.
Again, my experience with these groups is, the people seem very, very sincere to me. I just think there's it's like they need a software upgrade. In a sense, they've got kind of a model of the world that's a little bit obsolete. Now, that's not to say that the one that got me, and I always go back to this one because it's so clear. In Florida, passed a law that would have established a presumption of joint custody in the cases of divorce and eliminated lifetime alimony. And Governor Rick Scott, a Republican, vetoed it. And I just think that's what it is. I think it's astonishing.
Wow, I didn't know that got vetoed. I mean, I remember hearing about the sort of undoing of lifetime alimony spousal support in Florida. And I did hear about the kind of presumptive 50-50 custody, I think, for married couples that are getting divorced. But if I'm hearing him right, he's saying that was actually vetoed, I think by a Republican. So that's pretty disheartening. Also, I just want to give a little bit of shout out here to Aaron Renn with the Aaron Renn Show on YouTube. He's got about 3,000 subscribers. I think he's doing a great job interviewing Stephen Baskerville here. I mean, interviewing people can be hard. And I feel like sometimes people just want to talk and say what they want to say over the person being interviewed. And I feel like Aaron Renn came prepared some really good questions, and he's doing a good job of interviewing here. So if you guys want, give him a subscribe or at least a like on the video. I think it really deserves more visibility.
All of the...
Oh, no way. Klaus made it to... Yo, Klaus, I appreciate you coming in, man. And now I feel bad because... Klaus actually told me in the Discord a few days ago that he's got work tomorrow. So now I know he's up late and he's got work tomorrow, but he's going to watch the show after. But hey, man, it means a lot for you being in here. We're just going over this interview here with Aaron Renn and Stephen Baskerville, who's a professor of political science.
Stuff I think in some respects you're better off getting divorced in a blue state than in a red state. It seems that it's always the Republicans who have the most punitive idea that any man who's getting divorced is probably a wife beater. He's probably no good, and we just need to screw him as hard as we possibly can. And
that's the Steven Crowder thing again, right? It's like he has to be the villain, and they have to vanquish this demonic villain as hard as they can so that they can show how amazing they are. No problem, Klaus. Appreciate that. Dan the Man says, I heard about that, and it was done around the election for governor, and most Republican women would vote Democrat if those reforms are passed. Oh, wow. Yeah, God, politics is a dirty game sometimes, isn't it? I mean, if I'm somebody's campaign advisor, I could probably see why they would advise them to do that. But man, that's a really crappy thing. But yeah, that's a good example of real politique right there.
That's the way it's got to be. And that's the Republicans. I think the Democrats actually are like, oh yeah, we do have a more gender equalist society now. And I was talking with some people.
You hear what he's saying? You hear what he's saying? And I don't know if he's thinking about this too, but it's like he's talking about how much more punitive the Republicans are on the guy, and about how Democrats are more likely to have this gender equalist view. And kind of one of the things I've been saying is that red pillars and manosphere people and MGTOWers and the rest, men, are kind of caught up in this fight between tradcons and, progressive feminists, and that the tradcons and the conservative Republicans have taken the male vote for granted. And I really personally believe that there's a chance that red pillars can go and end up voting for a Democratic side if the Democrats put out a platform that makes sense for some kind of family law change or something to address these issues with men. And it's just if the Republicans don't do it first and the Democrats do, they could lose a lot of voters. Also, guys, just want to remind if everyone's watching, please hit the like button. It does help me. Appreciate everyone who's hit the like button so far. Dart Sidonia says, funny how women can come together and force stuff. But men, nope, still too many that will sell out good men to defend women no matter their character. Exactly. That's such a important point that you bring up there. And I have, I ask myself, like, why is that? Why can't men work together? Especially when men kind of pride themselves as being able to work together for the greater good. But when it comes to stuff like this, like the alpha simps, so to speak, will come in and completely like destroy any effort guys are doing to try to change this. And they'll be like, you're not man enough. And it's like, men are really still caught up in this old idea of masculinity. And I want to call it traditional masculinity, but whatever the Andrew Tate style hyper masculinity, G.I. Joe hero archetype is, right? Because it's like, if you look at feminists have successfully deconstructed what essentially is the princess archetype for women, right? It's like, used to be the hero slays the dragon and saves the princess, and they live happily ever together. Live happily, ever after together, and that was the thing, And then feminism came along, and it's made women not want to be princesses anymore. And men have been dealing with that, and it seems like a lot of men are still caught up in this hero archetype. Like, we want to be the hero, and I do get that, but it's like the hero archetype leads you to try to save the princess and then get screwed over in family law court. And I think we're still caught up by that. We're still the prince trying to save the princess, and she doesn't want to be saved. And I think you got guys leaning into the hero archetype even more and more and more and more to try to find meaning, but it's ultimately going to come crashing down in the end. And some red pillars are even guilty of this. This is like, self-improvement's good, but the people who rely completely on self-improvement and becoming the mythical high-value man, and that is the answer, I think these people grab the hero archetype and they just juice it on steroids, and they're like, you have to be the 0.0001% hero. But then even that guy gets screwed over in family law court.
We're getting divorced. One was in North Carolina and the other one was New Jersey. And I'm like, man, if I ever got divorced, I hope it's in New Jersey, not in North Carolina.
Anyways, but just going off that hero archetype, it's like those guys who identify with that so much, it's like if they look at a guy that they determine is weak, they just have to be, they demonize that guy in the same way almost as much as like the tradcons demonize Steven Crowder, right? It's just like, you're not this high value man, you're weak, you need to self-improve. We don't care about helping you because you don't deserve help, Or tradcons are like, we don't care about you, Steven Crowder, you don't deserve help. And there's just this problem. It's like, I feel like men have to look at the weak men, and we have to work together with the weak men and the strong men to help come out of this problem somehow. And the answer isn't to just make everybody, Andrew Tate. Klaus says something is going to give at one point. We just had the poll for EU Parliament, and the young men started to vote far right even more than the average. Yeah, that's been going for a lot of countries too, actually. That was a huge surprise here in Germany. And it's interesting, man. They're going to be voting that way. I just feel like I don't know. I think it's entirely possible that the far left or just the left sees that. Like, Klaus, they're looking at these statistics and they're like, damn, if we really want to hurt the right, we need to get some of these guys' votes somehow. And it's just like, I don't know. They're going to dangle some kind of carrot probably soon. I don't know. I just think that might happen.
Because apparently North Carolina just says, these laws are terrible. And New Jersey is like pretty much now joint custody. Here's one, like a lot of these stories, you hear the stories, and I'm sure that it's like anything. There are always miscarriages of justice in anything. How common or is the craziness? Is this a situation where, like, I need to be fair to say, yes, there are these outlier cases that are horrible, because you hear these cases like, the father, this woman has a kid, they're not married, she doesn't tell the father he's born, and she puts the kid up for adoption, and he loses his parental rights like 3 days later because for a kid he didn't even know he had. And then there's all this litigation. But those seem like pretty rare cases. I mean, isn't the normal case today much, I don't want to say benign, but much less? But how often do these crazy things happen?
Well, there's absolutely no statistics on this, so we don't know. But there's enough of them. There's enough of them to make a huge difference. I mean,
see, That's a great question, and it's a great point by Stephen. There isn't enough studies and statistics on this because it's like they don't care to look into this for men. For me, typically, I tend to look at this with the point of view of the fact that this can happen, and since it can happen, it's not right. You know what I mean? And if you get cheated on in a marriage and you unknowingly raise a child for 2 years and then get divorced when, after that second birthday, you're on the hook. That's just the way it is. That's how it is in California. That's one of the things I find most egregious. And for me, it's not even about how often does this happen. It's the fact that it can happen and does happen enough times for us to be aware of it, that this is a problem.
Most of the criminality in our society is perpetrated by, adolescent boys who don't have fathers. Terrorists are usually come from communities where there's large amounts of fatherlessness. In Europe, especially. The prisons are full of, you ask any policeman, ask any prison warden, and they will tell you that virtually 100% of the criminals and inmates are all come from fatherless homes. So it's enough to make an enormous difference. And, it's basically underlies all of the social pathologies in our society.
See, this is one of my issues with child support. Like, child support is taxpayer funded. What that really means is that, like, anybody could walk into a child support office and say, I want a child support order. I want you, the county, to do all the legwork and file this lawsuit, find the guy, get me the judgment, enforce the judgment, and send me money home. All entirely funded by the taxpayers to pay all the employees that used to pay my salary and all that stuff. All that stuff, you know what I mean? And there's no taxpayer funded custody, right? It's like, and that's because child support's just completely born out of welfare. It's all about just trying to save the government money on welfare, and it's not about families and saving families. So they have this mechanism that lets women completely take advantage of that. They don't have to hire their own attorney. They don't have to pay fees to the court to file these documents to get the court to hear it. Hell, and a lot of times they don't even have to show up to court. I mean, honestly, they just have to sign the documents and provide their information to the child support agency, and we do all the rest, But when you want custody, and custody is a problem, I used to hear that from guys all the time. They'd say, hey, okay, I get you guys want me to pay this, but she won't let me see the kid. She won't let me see the kid. And I'd say, sorry, there's nothing I can do about that. You want to walk over there across the street and you want to go to the self-help center and look at some of those documents and try to figure it out. I can't tell you what to do. And you're going to have to pay, you might think about wanting to hire an attorney. It's all I can tell you. It's basically like, screw you, go fight for custody off your own dime. So this guy's paying child support, maybe paying spousal support too, maybe lost half the house, or he's not living in the house and she is, and he's got to pay for another apartment. He's lost half his pension. And he's paying all these things, and it's like now you also have to fight for custody. So now you got to retain, pay a retainer to an attorney, or maybe not hire an attorney, but try to navigate the system of filing documents and paying the court moving fees and trying to figure out how to argue this. They really should make fighting for custody if they're not going to do a joint custody right off the bat, they should at least make it easier. Shout out to Lolpol. Lolpol on Twitch, so you guys can't see him in the YouTube chat. I haven't seen you in a while, man. I remember you were in Dubai last time. I'm running to Pakistan. Try coming after me for alimony there. It's on site. Well, yeah, good luck with that, right? I mean, I don't know if they'll come busting doors down in Pakistan to try to get spousal support out of you, especially if you go to like your, rural village where it's just you and your tribes folk. That's going to be real hard, let's just say there's been a lot of high profile people who were in Pakistan for a long time, and it took a while to find them. I don't know if they're going to come barking up your tree for alimony. Good to see you again, though, man.
Including, dropouts, truancy, educational failure, drug and alcohol, substance abuse. You name it. It's got the fatherlessness and family breakdown are behind it. So it's, we don't know precisely, but we know it's a lot. We know it's an awful lot of people.
Yeah, well, we know there's a lot of people going through the system. I guess one question is, like, are all these divorce rulings and settlements actually public? So if I had, like, a lot of money and I wanted to do a study, could I, like, troll through all the divorce databases here in Indiana and just get all these settlements and orders? Is it actually public?
As far as I know, yes, you can. Now, how much of that is computerized, I don't know. You might have.
To answer his question on that, yeah, it is public. You can because just as much as you can go sit in on any of these public hearings as a member of the public, you can, but that would be such a gargantuan task, because even us working at the child support agency, a lot of times if someone already had a divorce order and then they came to us and one party wanted child support, we'd have to order the divorce documents from the actual superior court. And a lot of the times you got to pay a fee. Since we were technically the county, I don't think we had to pay anything, but if you're just going there, you're going to have to pay the court a fee to be able to get printouts of this document, right? So you get this, or even online, you still got to pay them. So you can, I guess, conceivably get all these divorce documents and read them, but it's going to cost a lot of money to be able to do that, which is probably why they haven't done that. Lowell Pole 22, good to see you too, man. Long time. Hope you're well. Thank you, bro. I appreciate that, man. I'm doing all right. I ain't bad. I'll tell you that. So just chilling, man.
You go through the paper documents and so forth. And it would be very time consuming. As far as I know, divorce documents are public. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, divorce courts are often not public. They're supposed to be, of course. Justice is supposed to be public, and courts are supposed to be open. But divorce courts almost always find a reason to close their doors to the public, to journalists, even to family members. It's very common for extended family members, excuse me, grandparents, for example, to be thrown out of court on some pretext.
That's interesting. I wish I could look at that too. I mean, I'm just thinking of like Sacramento, like across the street. I could tell you specifically the child support courts were open to that. I mean, I think you can go in there and see family law, but I guess if the judge says no, then you probably have to obey that. Dart Sidonia says, yeah, like that one Andrew Tate copycat who tried embarrassing that guy from the Crucible on stage. And just showed he was an emotional man-child. Turns out he just yells at some of his subscribers for being too weak. That's actually a really good example. I saw that. That was, his name was Wes Watson. I actually saw a MTR Mediocre Tutorials and Review did a video on that incident. And then the Crucible guy is Andrew Wilson. So, yeah, I actually saw that clip too. I wanted to make a video on it. I think I kind of missed the boat on it, but yeah, it's like that guy kind of really ruined that whole show. I guess it was slated to happen when you got a bunch of hyper competitive guys on one stage all talking about what success means to them. But yeah, it was pretty cringy. It's like the ex-con guy who looks like he's steroided out, and he starts getting mad at Andrew because Andrew says his definition of success is more about family, and it's not about money. Money's more so a means to, helping achieve these goals of family and providing for them and stuff. Andrew's more like a hardcore tradcon. I think that's how I would classify him, as opposed to the kind of softcore tradcon, which is big conservative at the moment. But yeah, it really was embarrassing for sure. It made the whole movement look bad.
Not permitted to witness the proceedings.
Yeah, well, I would have assumed that just most journalists would. Why would a journalist ever go to see a divorce hearing, right? Unless it's like a really famous person, like a celebrity case or the mayor of the town or something like that.
Right.
But
yes, correct.
I think like TMZ and companies like that will order divorce documents from like high-profile celebrity, court cases, and then that's how they disseminate it to the public, because they'll be like, ooh, this person ordered to pay this much a month or whatever. And they probably just did a court request. It is public.
Even most criminal cases, I never see a journalist. Whenever I've gone for jury duty, it's like nobody's in the courtroom. Right. But it is interesting you say that they kick out like family members and things like that. I mean,
Yeah, oh yeah, they do. They look for any excuse to cloak what they're doing. Of course, divorce courts are not recorded. There's no court reporter unless you hire one yourself. So there's no record of the proceedings. So they're as secretive as they can be in a free society. Justice is supposed to be open. It's not supposed to be secret. But these are effectively secret courts.
So the only thing that would be there is the judge's formal ruling. So if he's,
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're going to request court documents, what you're going to see probably is you'll be able to see the summons, you'll be able to see the answer, you'll be able to see a stipulation if the parties agreed on it and it got signed and then the judge signed it off. Or you might be able to see whatever the judge's order is. So you'll probably see a judgment and some orders and maybe modifications to those orders, if that comes up again later.
And even that is often scribbled down on a piece of paper afterwards. I mean, you have this idea
that the scribbled piece of paper would be called the minute order, and a minute order is usually someone that's kind of listening to what the judge says, and they're hurrying up and writing what the judge says is the order. Like, all right, it's going to be $500 a month child support effective May 1st, 2024. Okay, parents to split health insurance costs or something like that. This person is the father of the child. Paternity has been established. And then they just hand these minute orders a copy. It's like on one of those big, long rectangular sheets, and it has like the pink one and on like the tracing paper or whatever. Then you get that, and you're like, what the hell does this say? But then later on, they usually do make like a formal order of the same stuff that's legible.
But all of this is formal and so forth. The judge will often say one thing, and then afterwards, the attorneys will discuss what's supposed to be written down in the court order. Mm-hmm. With the clients, the parents excluded. So it's what the judge says in his obiter dicta, what he proclaims from the bench, and then what appears in the court order might be two different things. But it's amazingly, it's just unbelievable the chicanery that goes on.
Now the the no fault. I think definitely, I would say I go back to the no fault divorce and yes, this was a bad thing, but until very recently, New York State did not have no fault divorce, and it was like a big deal. I used to live in New York. It was like a big deal. They were the last state that didn't have it, and it's always like the divorce lawyer lobby doesn't want it because this makes the proceedings more complex, more difficult to get a divorce, more costly, all that stuff. But even though they didn't have no-fault divorce, it still seems like they had. I saw no evidence that families were stable there, so it seems like it couldn't be like that. No-fault divorce by itself, repealing it couldn't be a panacea, because then you would just go, to New York.
Real quick before Stephen answers, the interesting thing about New York, at least from what I've read, is that so they were technically not a no-fault state. But they did have pathways that made it easier to get a divorce. So eventually enough states kind of put into their law that abandonment by one spouse or the other could constitute grounds for divorce. So in some states, it's like 3 years abandonment. Some states are 1 year abandonment. And I think New York might have been a 1 year abandonment. So it's just like, if you wanted to get divorced in New York, there's no fault. But if you guys just live separately for a year, then you guys can go into court. Hell, you can probably even fabricate this to some extent. If you guys, then you guys just go into court and say, one spouse abandoned. Then you don't have to say it was abuse or cruelty and adultery or some of this other stuff. You could just say they abandoned or they left the marital home for a year, and that would push the divorce through. So he's kind of mentioning that whether it was at fault or no fault, there doesn't seem to be a difference in the numbers, but that's because different states did at fault differently, and as time went on and no fault was becoming more popular, the states that still had at fault did make adjustments to their divorce law in order to help facilitate divorces kind of anyways. And then finally they just kind of caught up with it and let's just go with no fault.
That's correct. And in fact, what no fault did in many ways was it ratified, codified, legitimized what courts were already doing. They were
basically
already moving in this direction for several decades. And what no fault did effectively was it institutionalized that, ratified it, codified it. So you're right. Just a formal repeal of no-fault divorce would not in itself be a panacea. But any action like that, any campaign.
I'm glad that he does admit that, you know, and there's discussions about how a lot of tradcons too will try to say that, especially someone like Michael Knowles, like, oh, no-fault divorce was a disaster. Oh, we should go back to at-fault, absolutely, while smoking his cigar with the other folks there. And it really is not exactly true. I mean, because there are all these problems we discussed before, the forum shopping, the collusion, the perjury, and just all these little rules that did make it easier. And it's like, I don't think we can just magically go back to at fault and that these problems aren't going to be there as soon as that happens. I mean, you're going to have a whole divorce industry that's like, use your cell phone for this. There are probably going to be so many like fake domestic violence accusations that it almost wouldn't even be worth it at this point. You know, what they need to focus on is making the separation more fair and just when a divorce does happen. At the very least, you know, going back to it, unfortunately, isn't going to work. I do understand the sentiment, and sometimes I even think, hell, maybe it is worth it, even if it does have all those problems, you know, but that's unfortunately the situation. Klaus says, that's how it was before the no-fault divorce over here, too. Just live separate for a year, and you could get the divorce without further reason. Yeah, see, and Klaus is giving us the scoop and the insight as far as Germany's concerned. So it's like, yeah, it's effectively the same thing at that point. It's not going to stop anything, sadly.
Campaign to repeal the divorce law or to change the custody laws, which are important. All of this would.
Oh, Klaus says something else. The difference was there was no alimony pay then. Wow. That actually sounds like a lot better deal than what's over here, Klaus, because over here, yeah, there would be. I guess, I mean, maybe it would actually be similar to that, because depending on who did the abandonment, I mean, if it's like, say the wife wants to go and, okay, yeah, she leaves and now she's been gone for a year, then she's probably forfeiting alimony. But if the guy agrees and says, okay, yeah, I was the one who left, it would almost have to be her leaving for a year to then let the divorce go through. But then she would technically still have to take fault. So I don't know. Maybe that's true, but I can only think some places are probably like, nah, if you do it under these grounds, there's still alimony. But that still sounds more fair, which is kind of making the case for at fault a bit.
Require a debate and debates on these connected issues. Of course, the big issue is child custody. That would have to be addressed. The big issue is also the connected issue, of course, parental rights. Why are the parental rights of at least one parent in the couple being simply abrogated? A parent who's done nothing wrong through no-fault divorce can lose all access to his or sometimes her children. So you need to have that question about what constitutes parental rights, under what circumstances a parent can have his or her children taken away without having committed any legal transgression. You would have to have debates over the question of domestic violence and false accusations of domestic violence, because if you didn't repeal no-fault divorce, you would see a huge spike in the number of false accusations of domestic violence, because these false accusations of domestic violence are the trigger, the silver bullet that allows usually women to get custody of the children. In the past, it was oftentimes child abuse allegations as well were used for similar purposes. That they're less effective, but child abuse allegations are also very much a serious abuse that is connected with divorce courts and similar courts, family courts. So you would have to have debates on all these things because the advocates, the lawyers, the feminists, the judges would run behind the domestic violence accusations as a way of, as a way of affecting the same thing without the no-fault laws. The other thing you'd have to have a huge debate about, which needs to be done, is child support. Under what circumstances can a parent not only lose his children without having done anything, but be forced to have his income and his savings and everything he has confiscated to pay for children that have been taken away from him through literally no fault of his own?
Those are great questions, and it's like a lot of these problems, really come from the child support system kind of growing too big and too powerful. And it's like child support as a federal organization really is an enforcement arm of the welfare system, meaning public funds are being expended to keep a family housed and fed. Therefore, the public now has some right to encroach on the private lives of these citizens since they're in disorder, and it's costing the public some amount of money. And when federal child support system was new, it only applied to welfare cases. But then I think it was the mid 80s, and in a federal bill called OBRA, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, I'll have to recheck my notes, but what they did as child support kind of got more legs to stand on was the government started giving more funding to agencies who would then advertise child support to non-welfare families. And the reasoning was, well, if we can get them a child support order now, it'll decrease their chances of going on welfare. I was going to say increase their chances of not getting welfare money. But what that represented is this public system now kind of encroaching into the private sphere more and saying, hey, ladies, you can get a child support order. It's not going to cost you anything. We can get it from you. It's taxpayer funded. We know you're not on welfare, but hey, we still have services for you. And that led to this boom in child support activity because now they were able to get orders against middle class guys who have a job, right? If you're trying to collect child support from some guy, you're trying to collect child support from if I don't want to use the word Pookie, but you're trying to collect child support from Pookie or Ray Ray or these gentlemen. That's like trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip. And you're not even probably getting as much as the welfare is bringing back, and a lot of the times. But if you are getting a child support order against a guy that has a normal job, a middle class guy, it's so easy. You know where he works, just send a wage garnishment. It's 100% payment. And that makes it look like child support's doing their job because they're like, look at all this money we collected. But really, the welfare money still, like on those cases, the collection rate's way lower than on the cases with normal, hardworking people. So they had every incentive to just ruin the lives of the private American family by giving, the woman or the not provider all these things. Yo, Walter White with the super chat. Big shout out. I love Breaking Bad, by the way. That was an amazing show. I wish I can show your chat on screen, but I've been unfortunately having some problems with my app. Michael Knowles has no credibility. $10 super chat, by the way. Thank you so much. Michael Knowles has no credibility. He talks about how men should go to church and convince women to go. Michael is Catholic and his wife is not religious. She is you-know-what-ish. No way. I had no idea. Wow. See, and man, I'd have to, I really would want to look into that to read about that because that's crazy because he makes it seem like, he talks about going to Latin mass and all these kinds of things and how amazing it is. I had maybe incorrectly just assumed it was like a whole him and his family. So to hear if his wife isn't Catholic, that's very strange. I would almost question why he wouldn't marry a woman that was part of his church. You'd think that would be the obvious choice. Though that's an interesting story there. I would have to look into that. That's interesting info, though. Thank you. Dan the Man says his wife isn't religious. Dang. Yeah, that's taken me by surprise. Really.
Mm-hmm. In other words, people have the idea that child support is something that is assigned to fathers, parents who have abandoned their children or who have, at a minimum, acquiesced and agreed to a divorce. But this is not the case. Child support is forced upon parents whose children have been forcibly taken away from them. Parents who never wanted a divorce, gave no grounds for the divorce, did nothing legally wrong, did nothing to deserve having their children taken away. And yet their children are taken away. And they then come back and say, by the way, you have to pay for the children who've been taken away. And we're going to take 50 or 60 or 70% of your income or more. And if you don't have it, you are going to be jailed without trial.
Yeah, that's, we'd issue contempt hearing, or we'd do contempt hearings and have contempt orders, and then there'd be like warrants out for people's arrest. And then if you get pulled over for, I don't know, not stopping at a stop sign fully, and then all of a sudden the cop's like, hey, wait a minute, you got a warrant out for your arrest because for unpaid child support. Yeah, you'd be going to jail, man. I used to hear some stories about that back when I was at the Sacramento child support office. Now, I will say it varies, but the laws are exactly how he says, but the enforcement of them depends on how full the jail is. And here in Sacramento, they got so many people in the jail that it's more unlikely that they're going to throw the child support debtor in jail immediately. At first, they're going to be like, you got to do community service. Or first, they're going to be like, hey, make a payment in court today. If not, okay, you got to do community service. And then if it keeps going on, then the judge probably will finally, or the commissioner will finally be like, all right, you got to go spend some time in jail. And the last famous, I think R. Kelly had to go to jail for unpaid child support. Ben or Bret Hart, no, Bret Hart's the wrestler. Ben Hart, I think Pearlie interviewed him, but he was that recent case that was like that guy who paid millions of dollars to his ex-wife and still went to jail because he couldn't pay like 10 grand of it, even though he'd already paid like thousands and thousands of dollars more. And that's just another example of that happening. It is actually really crazy when you think about it.
Now, first of all, this is an incentive for the mother to file for divorce.
And then they're like, why don't you want to get married?
If she could take 50, 60, 70% of the father's income.
Exactly. It's an incentive for a woman. And not only that, but there's this groundwork that the child support agencies make it so easy for them to do that. If the man is the provider, there's always this temptation in every county in the U.S. that's like, hey, if you just walk into this office and you're not living with dad or you guys are separated, just fill out this application and we will do the legwork. We will do all the legal legwork. We have a bunch of attorneys working at the agency. We have all the caseworkers who are going to file these documents for you. It's going to run through this separate court called the Family Support Court, which is different from Family Law Court. That's how it is in Sacramento. And we'll get you the child support order, and we'll do you one better. We won't even just get you the order. We'll enforce it for you. We'll garnish their wages. We'll levy their bank accounts. We'll do it all for you. You don't have to pay us anything. There would be like a $25, $50 thing once a year or something as a kind of formality, but it really is pretty much $0. Now, if a guy walks in and he wants custody, none of that exists.
Tax-free.
Tax-free.
That's a pretty big incentive, and it's intended as an incentive for the mother to file for divorce. It's also an incentive for the state government to encourage divorce because they make huge amounts of money off child support. How that works?
How do they make money off child support?
That's a little complicated, but I can explain it briefly. They get money from the federal government for every child support dollar they collect. In other words, federal taxpayers are subsidizing divorce. You and I and every federal taxpayer are subsidizing divorce. Our money goes into state coffers for according to how much child support they collect. If they collect lots of child support, they get lots of federal money.
Well,
the only way they collect
crazy,
child support, yes, it's absolutely diabolical.
Well, I guess it's
anyone. I always say anybody who doesn't believe in a personal devil should look at the child support system because it's too evil to have been come about by accident. Only.
Okay, and there's a little bit. He's exactly right, by the way. But I wish he would have also mentioned why, right? Because I think Aaron Renn is probably listening to this and saying, well, why did they do that? Why did they pay the states? They pay the states in the form of welfare. So if you look at the way the Social Security Title 4D laws are, they have these block grants that go to the state for welfare, okay? And technically, the way the law works is that if you technically don't need to even like if you're a state, you can say, I don't want to have this federal child support system in my state. Get the hell out of here. The federal government's going to say, fine, you don't have to have us here, but we're not going to give you your welfare block grant anymore. And what that in effect does is it's threatening that state with increased orphans, increased homelessness amongst families. So now the state has this added cost of like trying to figure out what to do with all these unhoused people. And, orphans are going up. all these kinds of things. And the state, that's a lot for a state to have to deal with. So instead, they're like, all right, we'll take the money. All right, what do you want us to do? Then the federal governments were like, you need to have a child support system, and it needs to work like this, because the government's trying to get that money back. And the state also gives incentive payments. So let me just, I actually broke this down a little bit. These are, I mean, this is essentially the Social Security. This is SSA.gov. This is their website. And, you know, it's a lot of legalese, but here, grants to states for aid and services to needy families with children for child welfare services. So this is Part A, right? Part A is all about the welfare. And then when you get down, then you got a Part B, child and family services. When you get down to Part C, and then that's, okay, Part D. And so Part D is what the federal child support system is essentially operates under. This part of the law right here is what creates child support as a federal agency in your county. Child support and establishment of paternity, okay? Now, if you go down here, you can look at incentive payments to states. I believe that's this one. Here's incentive payments to states, okay? And I want to direct your attention to these 5, A through E here. These are what are called federal performance measures. So now I used to work at a child support agency. And like every 3 months or every year, I mean, we'd have these special meetings, and they're like all hands on deck meetings. And, you know, the number crunchers would come from downstairs and be like, here's how we did on our federal performance measures. Okay. And the higher we did, the more cause for celebration it was, because the better you did on the performance measures, the more money we were going to be getting in the next fiscal year, which is ostensibly how that is how our agency operates, and that depends on how many people can be hired or fired or whatever it is, right? So it's not even just about child support collected, it's about paternity establishment performance level. So the state has this issue of like, you have X amount of number of babies being born in a state. Let's say out of all the total numbers of babies being born, well, we know 44% of them are born out of wedlock, right? So 56% of these kids actually have a father on the books, right? And another 44% of these kids have no legal father yet. You know what I mean? So us as a child support agency, it's up to us to find out, to match up these kids with their dads. Now, we're receiving federal incentive payments to do that. Do you think we're going to care about who the true biological father actually is? No, we're not going to care. We just want to be able, at the end of the day, to present some Excel sheet over to the federal government and say, look, 98% of the kids in our state have a legal father. Now, whether or not that's actually the biological father, we don't really give a damn. We just want to be able to say we did good on this federal performance measure so that we can then receive these incentive payments from the federal government. It sounds pretty bad. I guess Stephen Baskerville said devilish was the word he used. Now, ideally, it's not that, but, you know, if a guy comes in and says, I'm not the dad, and he's already legally established as the father, we're going to be like, we're not going to help you. Try to figure that out by paying for it yourself at the family law court across the street. We don't care. We're just going to keep charging you child support. That's really what we do. Klaus says, so federal pays for the right laws in the state, and that payment in turn gives incentives for pushing divorces. Man, that's messed up. Yeah, it's what it does, right? Because this is something that gets on my nerves, man. But sometimes I'll hear people say, they'll be like, well, why are you guys worried about what Trump or Biden has to say about this? It's all up to the states anyways. It's state laws. But it's like they're so ignorant, they don't understand that the federal government is literally bribing the states to change their laws to match federal requirements. And that's what creates these laws that seem to be kind of uniform all across the country, because they're putting a lot of pressure on the states to conform to their laws, which then means that Biden or Trump can try to push and support something through Congress that would then maybe be more fair to men and say, hey, look, states, we just passed this in Congress, and you need to make paternity laws more fair and custody laws more fair. Otherwise, we won't give you the welfare money, right? So it's like they can use the welfare money to make this make sense, but there's no incentive to do that. If you have less custody, it means you pay more child support. if you're the father of some child and you're not, it doesn't matter. You still have to pay child support. So it's like really the government doesn't want to have to pay extra money to help you win custody when they can just force you to do it from your own pocket. You see how that works? It actually is very bad. And then the next one, so that was just paternity status, the support order performance level, right? So what that means is how many support orders were established. So now we know that like out of the 44% of these kids born out of wedlock or whatever, like however many of these kids are not living under the roof with their dad or a dad, did we get a child support order for these people, right? And it's more so about how many cases opened. And out of all these cases, were we actually able to serve a guy and say, hey, you owe the money and you're the dad, and now we're going to collect from you. So the more orders we establish, we get an incentive payment for that. The next one is current payment performance level. Current payment means how many payments of child support are you getting paid from these dads to the moms every month on time. That's current support. It's due this month. Were you able to get the payment that month and send it home to mom? If that number is high, or if that performance level, the percentage is high, you get an incentive payment for that. The arrearage payment. So if there's back pay that's owed, how much back pay did we collect? Did we do a lot of bank levies that year? Were we able to get, where we do IRS tax intercepts, these kinds of things? And then the cost effectiveness performance level. So that's for every dollar that is spent on a child support agency, how many dollars did it bring back, right? So it's like, we're entirely concerned with getting an order as fast as possible, finding someone who's dad, getting an order as fast as possible, and collecting the money as fast as possible so that we can turn around and go back to the federal government and say, hey, look how well we did on these things. Please send us more money. So, yeah, that's how that works.
An evil genius could have drawn it up. It gives the state an incentive to encourage as much divorce and single parenthood as possible, because only with fatherless children do they collect this child support get collected, and only this way do they get federal funds for the child support they collect. So they get money. The more divorces, and a few years ago, the California governor, Gray Davis,
and see, I mean, I'm sorry to do this. I just got to go back and show you. But it's just like, you remember how I was talking about like the fact that child support started advertising their services to people who were not on welfare, and they stepped out of bounds. I believe that's them stepping out of bounds. But since they receive an incentive payment to be able to say, hey, look, we got support orders. We got this much amount of money paid every month on time. It's easier to meet these performance levels if you're going after good men. If you're going after men that have good jobs on the books, they're not, selling stuff on the corner and you can't wage garnish that. But you can get some guy who's working, as a firefighter or as a whoever, you know what I mean? Even the guy working at Walmart, it's on the books. So the child support agencies love that they can go after non-welfare cases, because that's where they're able to get a lot of money actually collected from good people. He was talking about California Governor Gray Davis.
Vetoed.
I remember that guy. I want to go back so I can hear that.
Federal funds for the child support they collect. So they get money. The more divorces, and a few years ago, the California governor Gray Davis even vetoed a law against paternity fraud, so that fathers couldn't be forced to pay for child support for children who were not theirs. He vetoed this law. In other words, he supported forcing fathers to pay for children who are not theirs. And his rationalization for this, he openly admitted, was that California would lose tens of millions of dollars in federal funds. He said this quite openly.
See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm glad, this is a really good interview. It really does deserve more views. Shout out to Aaron Renn Show for interviewing Stephen Baskerville. But that's exactly right. And I remember Gray Davis. I think he got recalled. I can't remember exactly what the reason was. I got to look that up. I'm sure my parents know immediately if I asked them. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger came and became governor after Gray Davis. But that's exactly right. They're like, they don't want to help get rid of paternity fraud, because if they do that, then they got to find the actual dad, and then they can't get money from you, and then it's going to limit how much welfare money they can get to then go out. They're not incentivized to do that. In fact, they're incentivized to just say, you're the dad, too bad, nothing you can do about it, ha 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 ha, time to pay. So I appreciate that he put that there. Yo, big shout out to Walter White. I really appreciate your generosity. I wish I could put this up on screen. I got to figure that out for the next one. But Walter White says, I go to Latin Mass. I know a guy who is close to him. He also talked about how his wife didn't convert in an interview he did with Lila Rose. Wow. Okay. So you're actually pretty connected with, I guess, with that side of the church. That's really interesting, man. And, you know, I believe it, because at the end of the day, I don't know what it is about Michael Knowles. You know, he's a sharp guy. He's intelligent, but something about him comes off as a bit plastic. Like, the guy almost seems like a robot sometimes, or like almost inhuman. It's really weird. I guess that's kind of mean to say. I'm sorry, Michael, but that's how I feel for some reason. And, you know, behind that mask of this, like, very happy guy that follows the rules, and you should too, is a flawed human. And, you know, that's part of it. I'm sure there are people out there that see that and see the flaws in him. I got to read that again. I wish I could show it on screen just for posterity so people didn't. You know what? I can show it on stream. Let me just pop out my chat. Oh my gosh. Because I just have to show this. Like, if this becomes a thing, you know, right here. I go to Latin Mass. I go to Latin Mass. I know a guy who is close to him. He also talked about how his wife didn't convert in an interview he did with Lila Rose. You know, and it's like, you know, I tend to not want to bother people's religious lives. I really believe that's between a person and their own spirituality. And I love that we have the freedom of spirituality here. But, you know, Michael Knowles is a person that's like firmly living a life and purporting to live a certain life, and furthermore, really pushing those values and demonizing others, and especially men who are trying to solve this problem. He's just not helping us. So to hear something like that, it's like it makes entire sense. It's almost like he's married to a feminist, right? I mean, I don't know. It kind of makes me think of that Culture Wars episode with Pearl and Rachel Wilson, who's the wife of the Crucible, Andrew Wilson, with Lauren Chen and the other person who didn't participate much, Isabella. But it's about like submission, right? And it's like, well, you know, on the one hand, it's like Michael marries someone that's not of his same religion. You'd think he would demand that of his wife if they're going to be, you know, traditional. But yeah, okay, it's up to her to do that. But then she doesn't convert. It's almost like he's married to a feminist or something himself. You know, there's a lot of hypocrisy there. Dan the Man says, dang, bro, Michael is deaf. A fraud. Man, you got some serious inside information here, Walter.
You can't believe the evil that is going on here. I talk about this a little bit in my Chronicles articles, because what it does is it criminalizes. It places huge numbers of parents under the penal supervision, under the supervision of the penal apparatus. Law-abiding citizens who have been convicted of no crime, charged with no crime, suspected of no crime, yet they are placed under the supervision of the penal apparatus. We're talking here.
Well, you know, I know he's in Romania. I don't even blame him for being in Romania. I'm sure if I was an academic who read, I mean, I've seen pretty deeply into this, but I don't blame him for jumping ship and living in Romania, because he probably saw how the family laws worked here, and he was like, I gotta go. The Tradcons aren't doing anything. You know, I don't know Romanian law, but maybe it's a lot better than here, and that's probably why he went.
And they are basically semi-treated criminals.
Unfortunately, we're getting a bit of interference
by these plainclothes police officers who are child enforcement agents. And,
I used to be a child enforcement agent. Like, he's like, these plainclothes police officers. It's not funny. It's actually a very serious thing, and it's not funny. It's just the official job title of my job title was technically child support officer, it sounds cooler. I mean, child support specialist, child support caseworker, child support agent probably would be more apropos, but just because he's like a plainclothes officer. And we caused a lot of issues for people. Klaus says, well, that would explain the custody always goes to the women. Without custody for men, there's more money to collect. Exactly. And the state doesn't want to subsidize what they can just get guys to pay for. That's probably why Andrew Tate left too. Yeah, I would say so, and it's like, listen, I get Andrew Tate and all these kind of hyper masculine guys are here trying to tell guys how to be masculine, like men aren't masculine. I get it, but it's like even Andrew Tate, for as alpha as he is, right? Even he has to go to Romania or to Dubai or to these other places with better laws. It's really about the laws. It's not even that much about masculinity. I mean, I think men are just naturally going to be masculine. So this kind of like browbeating of like, you weren't man enough gets kind of annoying to me. And it's like, if even Andrew Tate didn't want to have his family in the US or UK, it tells you something that's why he abandoned ship too, because it's like, you can't alpha bro your way out of this. I just don't think you can.
And that's what social workers are. Between the domestic violence accusations and the child abuse accusations and the child support payments enforcement, social workers have basically become plainclothes police.
Plainclothes police.
Civil liberties and things that we normally impose on uniformed police. It's mind-blowing. The levels of evil that have been perpetrated by the divorce system are just, and this is why I argue in my Chronicles articles that basically this is behind the revolution that we've just seen in the United States. This is behind the election coup d'etat that took place, because for decades, we have been criminalizing, using the courts and the social service agencies and the welfare state to criminalize or semi-criminalize tens of millions of law-abiding citizens who can do nothing about it and who can be, as the phrase goes, taken into custody without actually having committed any crime.
You make a really crazy claim in this book that I just got to hear more about, related to exactly what you're talking about, when you say young black men are less likely to be incarcerated for violent crime than they are for non-payment of child support.
Yes.
I mean, that's astonishing. I have seen some stories out of, like, even in the New York Times has written about, they did a study in North Carolina, and it's like 1 out of every 8 people in jail is there for child support issues.
God, that's crazy.
And there's no statistics. You cannot get statistics, official statistics. The Bureau of Justice Statistics keeps no records on child support incarcerations. No state that I've ever come across. I quote a study by 2 social scientists in my second book, my latest book, where they investigate. They go into the courtroom and they watch young black men being incarcerated for non-payment of child support. I believe in Illinois, Wisconsin, and one other state. And yet they can find no record of these incarcerations whatsoever. In other words, secret incarcerations are taking place because of through child support enforcement. Not only,
there is a very uncomfortable conversation there about that. And I believe him, when he says these statistics. I would love to look at more of that myself. I mean, I know that, like, the black community has the higher rate of children being born out of wedlock, and they have historically been oppressed and targeted. And even when you think, a lot of these things kind of wrap in together, like if you read about the history of welfare, what you can actually see too is that, like, birth control were targeted at these welfare communities, and I don't want to be inaccurate, but if it's more probable that, a black person is on welfare, then they're going to be the victim of these kind of very oppressive practices, more than likely, because as soon as you're on welfare, they communicate with the child support office and they send, like, an instant task to them digitally. We would call that a service request, to open up a case and to start getting child support as quick as we can, because this mom and child is now on welfare. And even if you look at, like, birth control, certain welfare agencies would try to incentivize women to get on birth control in order to try to limit them having kids so that they wouldn't have more mouths, on the welfare system. And there was, I think it was called Norvoquist or something. I'll have to dig this up again, but women were getting incentive payments if they would get on the birth control, which you can almost think it's like the government tried to push this lifestyle onto people and push these things onto people to try to save money. But then it kind of just led to this culture that has now snowballed out of control. You know what I mean? I think there's a long, dark history here that unfortunately includes some of this stuff.
That, but it's been shown, and I don't have a hard evidence of this, but it's pretty common knowledge, that drug dealing is driven by especially drug dealing among low-income minority men, is driven by the need to pay child support, because the penalties for drug dealing are less serious, much less serious than the penalties for non-payment of child support. If you're accused of drug dealing, you at least get a trial and a lawyer, and some semblance of due process of law, I hope. In child support, you get none of those things. You are summarily jailed without trial, only the barest judicial procedures.
I guess when he says barest judicial procedures, as far as like Sacramento goes, and probably most of California, it's like you would have a contempt hearing, and if you don't show up, or you even show up and you can't pay, or you don't pay, or whatever. I don't know if leniency is the right word, but Sacramento would try to give more leniency, and it's like, okay, if you didn't pay this time, let's do a continued hearing. Okay, you didn't pay again. All right, now you got to do volunteer work over here and pick up trash or whatever the heck. And then if you didn't pay after that, okay, you're going to go to jail for a day. It's really stupid, and it's just like so stupid too, because like you send the guy to jail, and it's like, how the hell is he supposed to pay his child support if he's sitting in jail? It's just like so many problems wrapped into one.
Yeah, and I mean, I have read too that basically, especially when it comes to like low income, black men, for example, the mothers of these children are already receiving welfare and government supports, and the child support's not actually going to go to the kid anyway. It's just going to go to reimburse the government for.
Exactly.
Yep.
The government's going to seize the money just to cover we're going to take it to cover the public aid that we've been giving. So there's actually no net benefit to the child of taking people who are unemployed or whatever, or maybe they can't keep a job because they've been in jail from one of these things. It is like, it reminds me of what they were talking about in St. Louis, where these towns like get you.
See how it kind of feeds on itself. It's like they're doing this to get welfare. The guy can barely keep a job. They can't barely pay the welfare. So then at the same time, child support's pushing in on middle-class families, and they're breaking up middle-class families, and then they're getting most of their collections probably from those guys. And then that's getting them performance payments and incentives from, the federal government, which helps to subsidize the whole thing. It really is just like all these weird ways of welfare. It's kind of crazy.
On like a fine, like you get a traffic ticket, and the next thing you know, you've racked up thousands of dollars of fines, and now you're in jail because you can't pay the fine.
Not to mention there's interest on child support, back pay.
The whole town is being financed off fleecing low-income people.
Correct.
And I think it's interesting, because you talk about this, that conservatives are really kind of prone to kind of demonize young black men, like, oh, they're super predators, they're this and all that. When almost everything here is a result of fatherlessness. So the ones that are committing crimes probably didn't have a dad, and who was present in their life, maybe because he was in jail for not payment of child support. And so it's like, think about this guy who's in jail for non-payment of child support probably isn't spending any time with his kids. And this system is creating some of the problems. I'm going to say
and there is some documentation. I'll have to dig it up again, but it's like there's this big study called the Fragile Families. It's like a big study that they did, because there really isn't much statistics on this. And when in the mid 90s, I believe, when they really amped up child support, they started this study, and it was to follow these kids from like born in the hospital to grown up. And there was a part of it, like in some of the preliminary stuff, there are a lot of papers written on this study. And one of the papers I was reading talks about how a lot of guys are more likely to just give up on the family because they can't pay their child support. So they feel emasculated. So this is still going off the hero archetype. But as the child support system comes in and puts these unreasonable payments on them, he can't pay his child support. He's more likely to just say F it and just give up on the whole thing anyways. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't even feel like a man or a father, and it just really pushes them away from their families even more. It really does break up families. Yo, big shout out to Trevor with the $7.99 donation. Thank you so much. Walter White, you dropped this, king. Seriously. I think it's a cool username too. Also, Shah, sorry I couldn't comment more often. Currently in the city while listening in. Thank you for all you do. Yo, man, no problem. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you guys being in here. Even just one person in that chat talking to me helps me get the show off the ground. So you guys are huge. And I appreciate you kind of giving me that lurk there. Please don't feel too much pressure to comment. But I appreciate you in here. Yo, big shout out to Nasuji. Baby Shah. Outlaw hours on a Sunday. Yeah, I didn't stream last night, so I'm feeling pretty bad. Man, sorry, I thought I could hear my cat again. I just got to be attentive because she's kind of going through some things. I'll probably let her in probably like 20 minutes or so. We're about 47 minutes into this interview. It's about an hour and 30 minutes. I think I'll probably watch another 10 minutes of it and then call it. One of the big things that I spent like 3 hours editing this video today. It's about 36 minutes long. And I don't know if I'm going to post it tonight or tomorrow morning, but I do want you guys to keep watch for that. I hope it gets some traction and some attention. It's a conspiracy about the Whatever podcast, and it might be a little crazy, but I really would appreciate if you guys watch it and, hit the like button on it and try to get some engagement on it, because I think it does have a little bit to do with some of the stuff we're talking about here with the Tradcons. And that's going to be going up tomorrow. I finished editing it, but I still got to make the thumbnail. I'm debating staying up till like midnight to post it tonight, though I don't know if that's a bad time to post it because everyone's probably sleeping. Or maybe I'll post it in the morning before I go to work. It's probably going to be tonight. Nasuji says, stream is looking good, man. Good to see our boy. Thank you, bro. You and I got to do some gaming again. Everybody, Nasuji out here is one of my good buddies that I met on Twitch, and we used to do a lot of gaming stuff. And we need to do more gaming stuff, but we will. So if you guys are interested in gaming, and he does animation too, hit up his channel and hit a subscribe.
100% of the problems that everybody, every man who's in jail was a victim of some sort. But I do find it it's crazy. Nobody, especially with all the focus on over incarceration and all this stuff.
Yes.
It's like Black Lives
Yes.
Matter, too many young black men in jail.
Yes.
Massive numbers of black men are in jail for no criminal reason whatsoever. It's just they're being assessed things that they cannot physically pay.
Right.
And that there's
the
no
scandal. I'm sorry. And the scandal of all this is that neither the right nor the left are calling attention to this. In fact, the left and the right are colluding to allow this to happen. The feminists on the left and the law and order conservatives on the right are colluding in this to demonize young black men and, by extension, other men who are caught in this situation. And all it does, and we're on the spiral of social dysfunction, of crime, substance abuse, truancy. You name it. And yet, the left and the right are colluding to make this worse, rather than cooperating to solve it. Mm-hmm. And it's just absolutely mind-blowing. No social scientist studies this. No academic calls attention to this. No journalists go into this. No civil liberties organizations investigate this. I mentioned in the Chronicle's letter section, one time I knew an attorney from the American Civil Liberties Union. She did investigate 100 incarcerations in Pennsylvania for child support, and she did free some men. She managed to do that, but it never led to any other cases. I think she was probably, pressured by the ACLU not to continue this, and no other ACLU lawyer took it up. And yet it is.
So I just to point out, I wanted to share this because I like that he's an actual academic, and he seems to understand kind of more like under the hood how a lot of these organizations and politics operate. And even he's saying that he doesn't see any genuine or authentic push to solve these problems, which to me is like incredibly worrisome. There's no funding to do studies on this. There's no platforms being put forth. So I don't know. I value his opinion in that way because he is someone who's involved at a university level, and I'd like to think these guys know where to look when it comes to finding out the true data on these kinds of things. So it's a valuable opinion from him.
A flagrant violation of virtually every article of the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Now, and I guess there's kind of like two scenarios that I see. There's like one scenario where there's like an out of wedlock birth. Where they're like 40% of births are out of wedlock today. So there you're not talking about a divorce, but you've got you still have child support and all that. And then there's like the others that involve kind of these other situations with child support involving divorce. And my personal observation, and you hear, again, there's not great data on it, but it does seem to be to say today that joint custody of some sort is much more becoming the norm. I do think that there has been some correction on this, because it used to be like back in the 70s and 80s, it's like, okay, divorce, mom gets the kids, dad's paying child support, he's a non-custodial parent. It seems like today, and this is the era of latchkey kids, right? They were probably never involved in their kid's life, all that much to begin with. Now when you have this high investment parenting model, fathers are, asking for custody. It does seem like some sort of joint custody is practically the default today. And even if there's some child support, it's not as generous as it used to be. I mean, that's kind of my impression is there has been something of a pendulum shift.
I think there's a lot of people that would dispute that. I mean, this is what the media talks this way, but I'm not sure it's the reality. There was just a huge case in Texas. Several bills were killed by the Texas legislature that would have provided for shared parenting, joint custody. And the governor would have vetoed them even if they had passed. So it's
Stephen Baskerville's probably right. I would like to hope that Aaron Renn maybe saw some good statistics there. It would be nice if that's the case. Like I would love for that to be the case. But honestly, if I hear improvements of joint custody, the first thing I would think is that doesn't mean like 50-50 custody. It could mean that like dad has maybe some time on the weekends or something, and that would be considered shared custody. You know what I mean? So it's just like I would want to hear joint custody described more. Looks like Stephen's not really seeing it. Frankly, I'm not either, but I hopefully maybe Aaron's right to some extent. I'd love for that to be the case. Klaus says, I would like to see academics making case studies in these fields. They would be canceled right away in the current academic environment. That's actually a very legitimate point, and that's probably why it does not happen. Very true.
It's very different.
Which is sad, too, because then it just makes me understand how much under the thumb of, like, politics and, the money academia is really under, because they need funding. And if the politics and all this kind of stuff, if they can't get funding to study this stuff, then it's just not going to happen.
Things are fought by the bar association.
Or they're getting canceled. That's another problem.
Tooth and nail. Bar associations always make a point of getting control of judicial committees in the state legislatures. These are the committees that appoint and promote judges, and the bar associations control them for the most part. The chairwoman of the committee in Texas is a divorce lawyer, and she, along with some others on the committee, basically blocked this attempt. They basically rigged the whole process. The citizens who wanted to testify were told at the last minute about the bill. It was kept secret. The debate was very limited. And in the end, they talked the bills to death and they never passed. They never had a hope of passing. So I don't know. I'm very skeptical of this. I know that these you mentioned Florida. These bills generally, if they pass at all, they're usually killed. Marion Barry, of all people, succeeded in getting a joint custody bill in the District of Columbia a few years ago, but by all accounts, it's very seldom enforced. So it's hard to say. I would be very, very surprised. divorce is just too lucrative. It's just too lucrative an industry. It's something between 35 and 50% of civil litigation is divorce and child custody. It's big business. There's lots and lots of people making money on it, and they're not gonna give this up easily.
Now, the one thing I did see that my observation is, and this is, observation in this case just means seeing newspaper articles about it, that I started seeing in recent years that I never saw before, is children, if you want to call them that, who are like in their 30s, suing their non-custodial fathers to pay for grad school and stuff like that. And actually, judges are saying, yeah, he should have to pay for your grad school, even though you're in your 30s.
Way.
Like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, or well, what they should do is, force them to pay for law school, and then the whole system will be completely self-financing. No, basically the child support system is a racket. It's a system of people call it. I've called it this: child kidnapping and extortion. It's judicial.
It's just another way of eroding the authority of the husband, of the father. And a lot of times the tradcons come in and they're just like, well, you need to lead, you need to do this. And it's just like red pillars kind of retort with, you can't lead without authority. And, all these systems are just another way of taking authority away from the father. It's, it's bad. I mean, it just destroys families, and it just makes marriage not worth it for young guys. My only way of dealing with this is just being aware of the paternity laws. And if I was going to kind of seal the deal, so to speak, I'm more interested in the income. Like, if I found someone I like and she makes decent money, she's not lazy, I would be more likely to even marry her, because if we got divorced, it's a little bit mitigated, you know what I mean? Which would hopefully be better. At least in the divorces I saw, people are more likely to say, hey, what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine. Let's not, go crazy about this. Let's not go after each other's retirements. Let's just forget spousal support. If they both have something to lose. And, I know you guys probably heard me talking about dowry a couple of streams ago. I do still want to make my episode on dowry. And essentially what we're seeing here, we see TikToks every day of women complaining that men don't want to marry them, men don't want to commit, and it's because committing is very expensive. And this happened to humanity once before. Committing was expensive, therefore women came with a dowry. And it's different in different cultures, but if we're going to talk about Western civilization and look at Europe and specifically the line of Western civilization, the dowry was coming from the woman's side to the man specifically. And that was used to set up the new household. So, either she has income and comes with something to the marriage, or she comes with the big dowry. If neither of those are there, then it's just not worth doing. And I think maybe after a long enough timeline, we might figure that out again. Things like the soft guy era, kind of demanding stuff from women, I feel like is almost this primordial, or this almost unconscious callback to what dowry used to be. Dan the Man says, I have seen those stories like that, and it's crazy.
Child kidnapping and extortion. You seize control of someone's parents or someone's children, and then you force them to pay for it. If that were done by, if a gangster did that, of course it would be considered a crime. And yet judges do it all the time. So once you've started this, once you've legitimized a system of extortion, why not carry it elsewhere? Why not, I've got examples in my first book about how, 45-year-old children, so-called, collecting child support from their elderly parents. Or, it's just amazing.
How is that even possible?
And I think what he means to say is, kids who are now 45, the dad is still paying the mom child support, probably from some old order that had a bunch of interest growing on it. So, I've had cases like that where I actually had to open up the case. Interest would never stop accruing on a child support order, even if the case in our office closed down. So if there was an open court order, I've seen old court orders, but we have interest at about, I think it's 10% a year in California. And sometimes someone would come in with a really old order, from the 80s and say, hey, I had a case for a couple of years, but we closed it down and I want to reopen the case now. And I want all the money that's owed to me. So, it'd be like 2020 and whatever, and the kid's like mid-30s. And we'd say, oh, okay, how many payments did you receive? They'd be like, I only received like 6 payments in the beginning of the case. So we'd open up the case and put the order in there and say, here's 6 payments of child support in the 80s. And we would add interest all the way from 1980 whatever up to now. And man, it would just freaking be this huge ass amount. And then I'd have to make the call to the guy and be like, hey, how you doing? We had a case open in our office recently, and it's for this case, for this child. And they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? My kid is in their 30s. She's a doctor now. Why the hell are you guys trying to get child support for me? And so I think there might have been a little bit of a misspoke. I think he may have heard it as like children are extorting payments from their parents, but really it's no child support payments are being paid on behalf of a 45-year-old man from one parent to another.
You tell me.
Caesar says posted. I'll watch it. I will, bro. I will. I'll probably cut the stream here in the next 15 minutes, and I'm just gonna work on the thumbnail, and then I'll post it.
Elderly men raped by women and made pregnant by them, and then suing them for child support, or young boys who are forced.
Yeah, well, I have heard, like, I've definitely heard where like minor, high school boys are, raped, but statutory rape at least by their teachers, and then they get hit with child support to pay their rapist child support.
Yes,
it's totally insane.
It's absolutely insane.
The idea that someone who is like your rapist, the person who raped you.
Oh man. Well, it's probably not that big of a deal, but those words unfortunately can't be said on YouTube. This might be kind of a good place to end it. I mean, just give me a second. I'll be right back. I'm gonna see if I can let my cat in, and if she derails this, then it's done. I just hear her kind of screaming, and by screaming, I just mean meowing. We'll see if she comes in or not. But, yeah, I think overall this was a pretty good interview. There's still another 35 minutes or so on it. It's probably worth checking out. Stephen Baskerville. Let me see if I can pull up his Twitter just to kind of showcase him a bit. I think he liked one of my tweets like one time. Because there are a couple tweets that like Pearl would repost or retweet, which was kind of cool. So here he is. This is Dr. Stephen Baskerville, and he's got some bigger folks following him. So if you use Twitter, you might want to check out his stuff. He's got a website, stephenbaskerville.com. But it's interesting. I think we should support everyone who is kind of working on this problem. Everyone might have kind of different opinions on this to some extent, but I'd like to think he's kind of, on our side. And then Aaron Renn here is another guy. Let's look at some of the comments before we cut stream. And just see what they said, but check out his channel and maybe hit this video with the like just to try to see if more people see this. This is a great interview. The family is the cornerstone of society. Dangerous conversation here. Carry on. Aaron, thanks for taking on a topic that few, if any, Christian social conservatives will address. I'm a subscriber to First Things magazine and cringed when I read the article you referred to. Also, you nailed the white knight syndrome among Christian men. No wonder their own sons don't grow up, marry, and start families. Generally, Christian social conservatives are gutless on the issues discussed in this podcast. Stephen, excellent work. You put this problem into a constitution frame and shone light on many other aspects I had never considered. Nice to see an academic take on this issue in a thoughtful and also Christian way. Amazing work. This is, I'd love to see guys like, any of these folks debating some of the bigger tradcons. I think those would be great debates. Instead, what we get is these kind of straw man debates that kind of avoid a lot of the big issues, but hopefully we'll see more of that. What a shame the divorce issues gets overlooked by these groups who are so big on the family. Well, at least it's so rare these days that it hardly affects anyone. Anything Baskerville writes is worth reading. He's all over this subject like a rash, and it's amusing to watch all the industry racketeers come out from under their rocks to try and defend the indefensible. What he describes as a state-sanctioned kidnapping and extortion racket. Up, here she is. Hey, you made it. Yeah, I know she just wants to come inside. Oh, I can maybe... Oh, nope, wrong one. Ow. There we go. Woo. There you go, buddy. She's probably like, why you been sitting at the computer all day? All right. Well, oh, no way. I finally got this to go on the big screen. Nice. But anyways, yeah, that was pretty much it. I'll put the link in the chat for you guys just to make it easier if you guys want to see it. And I'm going to work on posting that video. I'm hoping to get that uploaded before I fall asleep. I'm going to start uploading it now, and I'm going to work on a thumbnail. It'll probably be something along the lines with the tagline of whatever podcast, a TradCon PSYOP, some kind of conspiracy thing. So till then, I appreciate everybody who watched, and I will do a stream again next week, ideally Saturday at 7 p.m. That's when it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be Sunday. I was out running around too much last night, having a good time, and I need to stick more to the Saturday schedule. So I just want to give a big shout out. Thank you, Walter White, for the super chats. Also to iTrevor for the super chat. Thanks, Klaus, for coming in. I know it's real late in Germany and you got work tomorrow, so that's a big deal. And a lot of the folks from Coach's stream that came in to say hi, Finley OS, I think maybe Caesar Quintana. And I will catch you guys on the next stream.